Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. We had just celebrated our 2-year anniversary the week before, and I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found someone who understood me so completely. We talked about everything: where we'd live, what kind of house we'd buy, how many kids we wanted, even what we'd name our future dog. She had this way of making even the most mundane planning sessions feel magical, like we were building something real and lasting together. I had started looking at engagement rings, nothing too serious yet, just browsing to get ideas of what she might like. Everything in my life finally made sense because she was in it, and I foolishly believed she felt the same way about me. You were planning your future together when she suddenly became distant, and at first I told myself it was just stress from work or school. She started taking longer to respond to texts, her replies becoming shorter and less enthusiastic. Date nights that used to be her favorite thing became obligations she seemed to endure rather than enjoy. When I'd try to make plans for the weekend, she always had an excuse ready. She was tired, she had work to catch up on, she needed some alone time. I noticed she was on her phone more than usual, turning the screen away when I walked into the room, taking calls in another part of the apartment. The warmth that had always existed between us started to feel forced, like she was acting the part of my girlfriend rather than actually being present in our relationship. Then came the conversation you never saw coming, on a random Tuesday evening that had started like any other day. She asked if we could talk, and something about her tone made my stomach drop even before she said the words. We sat on the couch, where we'd watched countless movies together, where she'd fallen asleep on my shoulder so many times, and she told me she needed to be honest about something. Her ex-boyfriend had reached out to her a few weeks ago, just a casual message at first, and they'd been talking. My mind was racing, trying to process what she was saying while also trying to stay calm and not overreact. She said it had started innocently enough, but had awakened feelings she thought were long buried, and now she was confused about everything. She was leaving you for her ex, the one she always said was completely in the past. And the irony wasn't lost on me even in that moment of devastation. This was the guy she'd told me had treated her badly, the one who'd cheated on her and broken her heart, the one she claimed to be completely over when we started dating. I'd heard countless stories about their toxic relationship, about how glad she was to have moved on, about how different and better our relationship was compared to what she'd had with him. She'd even said I was the first person she truly loved, that what she felt for him had been immature and unhealthy. Now she was telling me that same toxic ex was worth throwing away 2 years of what I thought was real love and genuine partnership. She claimed they had unfinished business, and that she needed to see if there was still something there. Words that felt like knives stabbing into my chest with each syllable. Unfinished business, as if our entire relationship was just a pause button on her real love story with him. She said she owed it to herself to explore these feelings, that she'd always wonder what if she didn't try to work things out with him. I sat there listening to her explain how she couldn't move forward with me while having these doubts, how it wouldn't be fair to either of us. The rational part of my brain understood the words she was saying, but my heart was screaming that this couldn't be happening, that the person I loved and trusted most in the world couldn't possibly be doing this to me. You were devastated, blindsided by someone you thought was your forever. And the worst part was how completely unprepared I was for this possibility. We'd never had a major fight, never gone through a rough patch that would have warned me something was wrong. Just weeks earlier, we'd been planning a vacation together, talking about moving in together properly instead of just spending most nights at each other's places. I'd introduced her to my extended family at a reunion, and she'd fit in perfectly, charming my grandmother and playing with my younger cousins. My parents had started referring to her as their future daughter-in-law. Everyone in my life saw us as a permanent unit, a given, the couple that would obviously end up married. Now she was telling me it was over, and I couldn't understand how we'd gone from planning forever to this ending so quickly. She promised you'd always be special to her, that this wasn't about you being inadequate, and I wanted to scream at the empty comfort of those words. She kept saying I was amazing, that I'd been the best boyfriend she could have asked for, that any woman would be lucky to have me. She touched my hand and said I deserved someone who could love me without doubts, someone who wasn't confused about their feelings. The compliments felt worse than insults somehow, because they meant I'd done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. If I'd been a bad boyfriend, if I'd neglected her or treated her poorly, at least then there would be something concrete to point to, some explanation for why this was happening. But according to her, I was perfect, just not perfect enough to choose over a man who'd broken her heart. But her words felt hollow as she walked out the door and back into his arms, and I watched her pack the things she kept at my apartment in a daze. Her toothbrush from the bathroom, the clothes she kept in my closet, the books on my nightstand, the photos from our trips together. She gathered them all while I sat frozen on the couch, unable to process what was happening. She cried as she packed, kept apologizing and saying how hard this was for her too, but I felt nothing but numbness spreading through my body like anesthesia. When she finished, she stood at the door with her bag, looking at me like she wanted me to say something, to fight for her or beg her to stay. But I had no words left. She hugged me one last time, and I could smell her perfume, feel her hair against my cheek, all the familiar sensations that would soon become just memories. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence of my apartment. I sat there on the couch for what might have been minutes or hours, staring at the space where she'd been standing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The apartment felt different already, emptier somehow, even though most of the furniture was still mine. I kept expecting her to walk back in, to tell me this was all a mistake or a bad dream, but she didn't come back. She was really gone, back to the man who'd hurt her before and would probably hurt her again, and I was left alone trying to figure out how my entire future had just evaporated in the span of one conversation. Everything I'd been so certain about, our love, our future, our partnership, had turned out to be built on sand, and the tide had just washed it all away. The worst part was knowing that somewhere across town, she was probably already with him, maybe in his arms, maybe kissing him the way she used to kiss me. While I sat in the wreckage of our relationship trying to understand what had happened, she was starting her new beginning with her old flame. The thought made me physically sick, and I ran to the bathroom, gripping the sink and staring at my reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at me seemed like a stranger's. I'm someone who'd been naive enough to believe that love and effort and treating someone well would be enough to keep them. I'd learned a brutal lesson that night. Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose, because the heart wants what it wants, and apparently her heart wanted him more than it had ever wanted me. The weeks after the breakup were the darkest of your life, a period where time seemed to move both impossibly slow and frighteningly fast at the same time. Days blended together in a haze of pain and exhaustion, each morning bringing the fresh realization that she was really gone and wasn't coming back. I'd wake up reaching for her side of the bed, that split second before full consciousness when I'd forgotten what happened, and then reality would crash over me like a wave. The weight of her absence felt physical, like someone had placed a boulder on my chest that made even breathing feel like work. I called in sick to work more than I should have, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying our last conversation over and over, searching for clues I'd missed or words I should have said differently. You couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the pain of being abandoned for someone from her past. Food tasted like cardboard when I bothered to eat at all, and I lost 15 pounds in the first 3 weeks without even trying. My clothes started hanging off me, and people at work noticed, asking if I was okay with concerned expressions that made me want to scream. Sleep became impossible, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her voice telling me she was leaving, felt the ghost of her final hug. When exhaustion finally forced me into unconsciousness, I'd dream about her, sometimes happy dreams of our time together that made waking up even more painful, sometimes nightmares where I watched her walk away over and over again in an endless loop I couldn't escape. Your friends tried to console you, but nothing helped because they couldn't understand the depth of what I'd lost. My best friend Marcus came over with pizza and beer, trying to get me to talk about it, saying all the standard breakup platitudes about how there were plenty of fish in the sea and how she didn't deserve me anyway. My sister called every day, sometimes just sitting on the phone in silence when I didn't want to talk. Her presence a small comfort, even though she couldn't fix anything. Coworkers who knew about the relationship offered sympathetic looks and awkward condolences that made me feel like someone had died, which, in a way, someone had. The version of me that believed in us, that trusted in our future together. Everyone meant well, but their words slid off me without penetrating the fog of grief I was living in, but nothing helped because the pain was too deep and too consuming to be touched by kind words or logical arguments about why I'd be better off without her. People kept telling me time would heal it, that I'd move on eventually, that one day I'd wake up and it wouldn't hurt so much. But I couldn't imagine that future version of myself, couldn't see past the immediate agony of right now. How do you move on from someone who'd been woven into every part of your life, who knew all your stories and dreams and fears? How do you unlearn the habit of reaching for your phone to text them about something funny or wanting to share every small moment of your day with them? The loneliness was suffocating, made worse by the fact that the one person I wanted to talk to about my pain was the person causing it. You saw her social media posts with him, the same restaurants you'd gone to, the same activities you'd done together, like she was replacing you piece by piece. I know I should have unfollowed her immediately, should have blocked her and removed that temptation, but I couldn't stop myself from checking. It became a form of self-torture, refreshing her profile multiple times a day to see what new evidence of her happiness without me had appeared. There they were at Antonio's, the Italian place I'd taken her for our 6-month anniversary where she'd said she'd never been happier. There they were, hiking the trail we discovered together last fall, the one she'd claimed was our special spot. There they were at the farmer's market we used to go to every Sunday morning, drinking coffee and holding hands exactly like we used to do. The same restaurants you'd gone to, the same activities you'd done together. And each post felt like she was deliberately erasing me from her history and writing him into all the spaces I used to occupy. She was wearing the necklace I'd given her for her birthday in one photo, and that small detail broke something inside me. Why would she keep wearing my gift while being with him? Was it thoughtlessness or cruelty? Did she think about me at all when she put it on each morning? Or had I become so insignificant that she'd forgotten where it came from? Every photo was a fresh wound, proof that she was moving on effortlessly while I was drowning in grief. Her captions were cheerful, talking about new beginnings and happiness, with heart emojis and inside jokes that made it clear they were already building their own shared language, like she was replacing you piece by piece. And I started to wonder if I'd just been a template she was now using with someone else, a rehearsal for the real thing. Had she learned what she liked in a relationship through me, only to take those lessons and apply them with him? When he took her to dinner, did she order the same wine I'd introduced her to? When they went hiking, did she point out birds and plants using the knowledge she'd gained from our nature walks? Was I just a stepping stone, someone who'd served a purpose in her journey, but was never meant to be the destination? The thought made me feel disposable, like I'd been used and discarded once I'd fulfilled my function in her personal growth and development. Every memory of your relationship felt tainted now, corrupted by the knowledge of how it ended and the questions I couldn't stop asking. I'd remember her telling me she loved me, those 3 words she'd said hundreds of times over 2 years, and wonder if any of them had been true. When she'd said I was the best thing that ever happened to her, had she meant it? Or was that just what people say when they're in a relationship? When we'd made plans for our future, had she actually seen me in it? Or was she just going through the motions until something better came along? I couldn't trust any of it anymore. The foundation of our entire relationship had revealed itself to be quicksand, and I was left questioning everything I thought I knew about love and commitment and whether anything was ever really real. Every "I love you," she'd said suddenly suspect, and I found myself mentally cataloging them all, searching for the moment when they'd stopped being true. Had there been a specific day when her feelings changed? Was there a last genuine "I love you," followed by increasingly hollow repetitions she'd said out of habit rather than feeling? When we'd been intimate, when she'd looked into my eyes and whispered those words in the darkness, had she already been thinking about him? The betrayal felt layered. Not just that she'd left, but that she'd let me continue believing in us while she was already emotionally checking out. How long had she been lying to me, to herself, to both of us about what we really were? Had she been thinking about him the whole time? The question haunted me at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come and my mind spun in circles trying to make sense of everything. When she'd been making love with me, had she been imagining it was him? When we talked about our future, had she been comparing me to him in her mind, finding me lacking in ways she never voiced? Had our entire relationship been nothing but a distraction for her, a way to pass time until her real love came back around? I tortured myself with these thoughts, knowing I'd never have answers, knowing that even if I asked her, she probably couldn't tell me the truth because she might not know it herself. You felt like a placeholder, someone to keep her company until her real love came back around, and that realization was somehow worse than the breakup itself. Being left is painful, but being left for an ex carries its own special kind of humiliation. It meant I'd never really had her completely. The part of her heart had always belonged to him, that I'd been auditioning for a role that had already been cast. I was the understudy who'd gotten some time on stage, but was always destined to step aside when the real star returned. Every moment of our relationship that I'd treasured, every milestone I'd celebrated, every plan we'd made, all of it had been built on the unstable foundation of her unresolved feelings for someone else. I hadn't lost to a better man or a new love. I'd lost to history, to nostalgia, to the magnetic pull of unfinished business, and that made me feel completely powerless. The apartment became a prison of memories I couldn't escape. Every corner holding some reminder of her presence. The coffee mug she'd always used was still in the cabinet, and I couldn't bring myself to either use it or throw it away. The blanket she'd bought for movie nights was still draped over the couch. Her favorite tea was still in the pantry. Little pieces of her were everywhere, ghosts of a life we'd built together that no longer existed. I'd catch myself setting the table for 2 or picking up her favorite ice cream at the grocery store before remembering she wouldn't be there to eat it. My body and mind hadn't caught up to the new reality yet, still operating on autopilot from 2 years of habit and routine that included her. Friends suggested I get rid of everything that reminded me of her, do a complete purge and start fresh, but I couldn't do it. Partly because removing all traces of her felt like admitting she was really gone forever, and partly because even pain felt better than numbness. At least when I was hurting, I was feeling something. At least the ache in my chest proved that what we'd had mattered, even if it hadn't mattered enough to keep her. So I lived among the ruins of our relationship, a ghost haunting my own life, waiting for some moment of clarity or healing that felt impossibly far away. The worst part was knowing that while I was suffering in this tomb of memories, she was out there creating new ones with him, probably not thinking about me at all. One night, sitting alone in your apartment surrounded by reminders of her, you made a decision that would change everything. It was a Friday evening, about 5 weeks after the breakup, and I just spent another day calling in sick to work, lying in bed scrolling through her social media, torturing myself with images of her happiness. I looked around my apartment and barely recognized it. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry scattered everywhere, curtains drawn against the world outside. I caught my reflection in the dark TV screen and saw someone I didn't know, someone hollow and broken and pathetic. Something inside me snapped in that moment, not in an explosive way, but more like a switch flipping. I realized with sudden clarity that if I continued on this path, I would destroy myself completely. And she wouldn't even notice or care because she was too busy being happy with him. You couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep giving her power over your emotional state. And that realization hit me like a splash of cold water to the face. She had left me, had chosen someone else, and yet I was still organizing my entire existence around her absence. Every decision I made was influenced by thoughts of her, what she might think, whether she might see, if she might regret leaving me. I was giving her free rent in my head, allowing her to control my happiness from a distance, without her even trying. The irony was brutal. She'd moved on immediately while I was stuck in this loop of grief and obsession, which meant she'd won twice. She got to leave and be happy while also maintaining power over me through my inability to let go. That had to end, and it had to end now, tonight, before I lost myself completely. You deleted her from social media, blocked her number, and removed everything that reminded you of her, and it felt like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia. I started with social media, my hands shaking as I clicked the unfollow button on Instagram, then Facebook, then Twitter. Each click felt momentous, like I was severing a limb. Then I went further. I didn't just unfollow, I blocked her completely, cutting off any possibility of weakening and checking her profiles during a moment of loneliness. Her number was next, and I hesitated over that one the longest, my finger hovering over the block button while some desperate part of my brain screamed that this was too permanent, that I was closing a door I might regret closing. But I did it anyway, and then I blocked her on messaging apps too. Every possible avenue of contact systematically eliminated. It felt like ripping off a bandage, painful but necessary, and I didn't stop there because half measures wouldn't work anymore. I went through my apartment like a tornado, gathering everything that reminded me of her into garbage bags. The coffee mug went in, along with the blanket, her favorite tea, the books she'd left behind, the photos from our trips that I'd had framed and hung on the walls. I took down the picture of us from my nightstand, the one where we were laughing on the beach, both of us sun-kissed and happy and completely in love. Looking at it now felt like looking at strangers, people who'd existed in a different lifetime. I threw away the t-shirt she used to sleep in that still smelled faintly like her perfume, the one I'd been pathetically holding at night like a security blanket. The clothes she'd given me as gifts went into a donation bag. I couldn't keep wearing the sweater she'd picked out. Couldn't keep being reminded of her every time I got dressed. Cards and notes she'd written me. Little declarations of love and inside jokes scrawled on torn pieces of paper all went into the trash. I deleted our text message history, thousands of messages documenting 2 years of daily communication, inside jokes, plans, photos, all of it gone with one click. I removed her contact information from my phone completely, not just blocked, but deleted, so I wouldn't even see her name anymore. Every song she'd loved got removed from my playlists. Every movie we'd watched together got deleted from my streaming queue. I was erasing her from my life with the thoroughness of someone removing evidence from a crime scene. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and I had 4 garbage bags of memories sitting by my door, ready to be thrown out with the morning trash. My apartment looked bare, almost sterile, with lighter rectangles on the walls where photos had hung and empty spaces on shelves where her things had been. It hurt to look at, hurt to see the physical proof of her absence, but it also felt clean somehow, like I'd lanced an infected wound that had been poisoning me slowly. I took all the bags down to the dumpster right then, not wanting to wait until morning and risk changing my mind. As I threw them in and heard the heavy thud of 2 years of memories hitting the bottom of the dumpster, I felt something shift inside me. Not healing exactly, but the first tiny step toward it. You started going to the gym, throwing yourself into work, reconnecting with friends you'd neglected during the relationship, filling the void she'd left with action instead of wallowing. The very next morning, despite having barely slept, I dragged myself out of bed at 6 a.m. and went to the gym in my apartment building that I'd been ignoring for months. I had no plan, no fitness goals. I just knew I needed to move. Needed to do something physical to channel the rage and hurt still coursing through my body. I got on the treadmill and ran until my legs burned and my lungs screamed, pushing myself harder than I had in years. And for those 30 minutes, I wasn't thinking about her at all. I was just focused on breathing, on putting one foot in front of the other, on the simple physical challenge of not giving up. The endorphins afterward were the first moment of relief I'd felt in weeks, a brief window where the constant ache dulled to something manageable. So I went back the next day, and the next, building a routine that gave structure to days that had felt shapeless and endless. I started with just cardio, running my pain out on the treadmill or the elliptical, but eventually added weights when I realized I needed something more challenging to occupy my mind. Working out became my therapy, the 1 hour a day where I had complete control over something, where effort directly correlated to results in a way that made sense. Every rep, every mile, every drop of sweat was proof that I was still capable of discipline and commitment, even if my relationship had fallen apart. Throwing yourself into work became another survival mechanism. And I volunteered for every project and extra assignment I could get my hands on. The promotion I'd been half-heartedly pursuing before suddenly became a mission, something concrete to work toward when everything else felt uncertain. I stayed late at the office, came in early, took on responsibilities I'd previously avoided because they seemed too time-consuming. My manager noticed the change in my work ethic and commented on it, pleased but slightly concerned. What I didn't tell her was that work was a refuge, that the more hours I spent focused on spreadsheets and presentations and client meetings, the fewer hours I spent thinking about the woman who'd abandoned me. Exhaustion became my friend, because exhausted meant I might actually sleep instead of lying awake replaying memories. Reconnecting with friends you'd neglected during their relationship was harder than I expected, partly because I felt guilty about how I'd let those friendships slide when I'd been consumed with her. Marcus was forgiving when I finally called him back after ignoring his messages for weeks, just happy to hear I was finally trying to pull myself together. We started having weekly basketball games at the park, something we used to do before I'd met her. My college roommate Jake, who I hadn't talked to in months because I'd been so wrapped up in my relationship, invited me to join his weekly poker game. Being around people who knew me before her, who remembered the version of me that existed independently, helped me start to remember that person too. Slowly, painfully, you began to rebuild yourself, and it wasn't a linear process with steady progress, but rather 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Some days I felt strong, hitting the gym hard, crushing it at work, laughing with friends like my old self might actually be recoverable. Other days I'd wake up crushed by the weight of her absence all over again, the progress I'd made feeling fragile and temporary. I'd see a couple holding hands on the street and feel the wound rip open fresh. I'd hear a song that reminded me of her and have to pull over because tears blurred my vision too much to drive safely. The healing wasn't smooth or pretty or inspirational. It was messy and painful and exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with the gym. But I kept going because the alternative was going back to who I'd been in those first few weeks, the broken, hollow version of myself who lived in the dark and survived on the scraps of her social media presence. I'd rather be in pain while moving forward than in pain while staying stuck. Every morning I made a choice to get out of bed, to go to the gym, to show up at work, to respond to my friends' messages. Some mornings that choice was harder than others, and some days I chose poorly and regressed, but overall the trajectory was upward. I started to have hours where I didn't think about her, then half days, then eventually full days where she didn't cross my mind until I was lying in bed at night taking inventory of my thoughts. The goal wasn't to get over her. That felt impossible. Like asking me to forget 2 years of my life or stop caring about someone I'd planned a future with. Love doesn't just evaporate because it's no longer convenient or wanted. The feelings I'd had were real, even if the relationship had turned out to be built on shaky ground, and those feelings didn't have an off switch I could flip. So I didn't aim for that impossible standard of being completely over her, of reaching some mythical place where I felt nothing and she was just another person I used to know. That destination seemed unreachable, and setting it as the goal would have just set me up for failure and disappointment, but simply to survive one day at a time, and that more modest goal felt achievable even on the hardest days. Just survive today. Just get through the next 24 hours without falling apart completely. Don't worry about tomorrow or next week or whether I'll ever be truly happy again. Just make it through today. Wake up, go to the gym, go to work, eat something even if food tastes like cardboard, talk to a friend, go to bed, repeat. Some days surviving looked like conquering the world, hitting personal records at the gym and killing it in a work presentation. Other days, surviving looked like simply not calling her, not checking what she was doing, not driving by places we used to go. Both counted as wins. I started keeping a journal, something I'd never done before, just to track the small victories and remind myself on bad days that I was actually making progress. Didn't check her social media became a frequent entry, a reminder that I'd made it through temptation, ran 5 miles or bench pressed personal best, documented physical progress that felt concrete when emotional progress felt invisible, laughed at Marcus's dumb joke, or actually enjoyed dinner with friends, marked moments when I'd felt something other than pain, proof that other emotions were still accessible, even if they felt rare and fleeting. The journal also became a place to be honest about the setbacks, the days when I failed spectacularly at moving forward. Dreamed about her, woke up crying, appeared more often than I wanted, almost texted her, stared at phone for 20 minutes, documented the close calls when I'd nearly undone all my progress. I saw someone who looked like her at the grocery store, had a panic attack in parking lot, recorded the unexpected triggers that still had power over me. But writing it all down helped somehow. Got the poison out of my system and onto paper where I could see it and acknowledge it without letting it consume me. Weeks turned into months, and the apartment that had felt like a tomb slowly started feeling like a home again. I rearranged the furniture, putting things in new positions so the space wouldn't remind me so much of how it had been when she was part of it. I bought new sheets for the bed, got rid of the ones that held memories of her. I painted one wall a different color just to make the place feel different, more mine and less ours. Small changes that added up to creating a space that belonged to this new version of me, the one who was learning to exist without her. The gym became less about running from pain and more about building something new, about creating a version of myself that was stronger physically and maybe eventually emotionally too. I hired a trainer who pushed me harder than I'd push myself, and the structure of having someone else design my workouts gave me one less thing to think about and decide. My body started changing, muscles appearing where there had been softness, my clothes fitting differently, people noticing and commenting on the transformation. It felt good to have something to show for all this effort, some visible proof that I was putting in the work, even if the internal healing was invisible and slow. Work success came more easily than emotional healing, and within 3 months I got the promotion I'd been chasing, along with a significant raise and new responsibilities. My boss said she was impressed with my dedication and growth, that I'd really stepped up in recent months. If she knew I'd been using work as an escape mechanism, she didn't mention it. The promotion meant new challenges, more money, an office with a window instead of a cubicle, concrete achievements I could point to and say, I did that, when everything else felt uncertain. It wasn't happiness, but it was progress, and progress was all I could ask for. Months passed and something unexpected happened. You started to feel like yourself again, only better, and the change crept up on me so gradually I almost didn't notice it, until one day I caught my reflection in a store window and had to do a double take. 6 months had gone by since that terrible night when she'd walked out, half a year of putting one foot in front of the other and doing the work of healing, even when I didn't believe it would make a difference. I'd expected at best to return, to who I'd been before her, to recover some semblance of my old self. What I hadn't expected was to discover that the breaking had created space for rebuilding something entirely new, something stronger and more authentic than what had existed before. The man looking back at me from that window wasn't the broken shell from those first few weeks, but he also wasn't the naive guy who'd believed love and effort were enough to keep someone from leaving. The gym visits paid off, and you were in the best shape of your life. A transformation that was visible to everyone but meant something deeper to me than just aesthetics. I'd lost 30 pounds of weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying, replaced it with muscle that changed the entire structure of my body. My trainer Marcus, different Marcus from my friend, though the coincidence had made me smile when we met, had pushed me through plateaus I would have given up on alone, teaching me that discomfort was just growth in disguise. I could do things now that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago: run a 10K without stopping, bench press my body weight, hold a plank for 3 minutes. But more than the physical achievements, the gym had taught me about discipline and consistency, about showing up even when you didn't feel like it, about trusting that small daily actions would compound into major changes over time. The extras. Hours at work led to a promotion that changed my career trajectory entirely, moving me from a mid-level analyst position to a senior role with direct reports and real decision-making authority. My boss Sarah had pulled me into her office 2 months ago to tell me they were creating a new position and I was their first choice, that my dedication and performance had been exceptional. The raise was substantial, enough that I'd been able to move to a nicer apartment in a better part of town, leaving behind the place that held so many ghost memories. But more valuable than the money was the confidence that came from excelling at something through my own merit, from having concrete proof that I was capable and valuable, regardless of whether someone chose to stay in my life romantically. The time with friends reminded you who you were before her, and those relationships had deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated when I'd first reached back out. My friend Marcus, the original Marcus, my best friend since college, and I had fallen back into our old rhythm of basketball games and terrible action movies and conversations that could jump from completely stupid to surprisingly deep without warning. He'd been there through the worst of it, had seen me at rock bottom, and now got to witness the rebuilding. Jake's poker group had become a weekly highlight, a space where I could be competitive and strategic and social without any romantic complications or expectations. These friendships felt solid in a way my relationship never had, built on years of history and the kind of loyalty that doesn't evaporate when something shinier comes along. I'd even reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with during my relationship, people I'd gradually stopped calling or seeing because all my free time had gone to her. Alex invited me to join his recreational soccer league, and suddenly my weekends had structure again, games on Saturday mornings followed by beer and food with the team. My cousin Tyler, who I'd always been close to growing up, started a monthly tradition of trying new restaurants around the city. These connections reminded me that I'd had a full life before her, that I was someone with interests and relationships and an identity that existed independently. I'd forgotten that during the relationship, I'd let my world shrink down to just us, and reclaiming that broader sense of self felt like coming home. You even started therapy to work through the abandonment issues and understand the red flags you'd missed, a decision I'd resisted at first because it felt like admitting I couldn't handle this alone. but my sister had gently suggested it after a phone call where I'd spent an hour analyzing what I could have done differently, and something about the way she'd said it made me finally agree. Dr. Chen, my therapist, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an unsettling ability to ask questions that cut straight through my defenses. The first few sessions were brutal, pulling up feelings I'd been trying to bury, examining wounds I'd wanted to pretend had healed. But slowly, she helped me see patterns I'd been blind to, ways I'd ignored my own needs to accommodate hers, red flags I'd dismissed because I'd been so invested in the relationship, working. Understanding the red flags you'd missed was painful, but necessary. Like finally getting glasses and realizing you'd been walking around with blurry vision for years. Dr. Chen helped me see that my ex had shown signs of not being fully committed long before the end, the way she'd sometimes go distant without explanation, the times she'd seemed more interested in the idea of our future than the reality of our present, how she'd kept certain parts of her life separate from me in ways that seemed normal at the time, but now looked like keeping one foot out the door. She'd maintained a surprisingly close friendship with her ex even early in our relationship, something she'd framed as mature and healthy, but that had probably signaled unresolved feelings I'd been too trusting to question. But therapy wasn't just about understanding what had gone wrong with her. It was about understanding patterns in myself, ways I'd learned to seek validation from romantic partners because of my own childhood experiences. Dr. Chen helped me see how my parents' divorce when I was 12 had created abandonment wounds that made me cling too tightly to relationships. How I'd learned to equate love with sacrifice and effort rather than mutual respect and genuine compatibility. I'd been trying to earn love by being perfect, by never causing problems, by accommodating every need and request, when real love wasn't supposed to be something you earned through good behavior. It was supposed to be freely given, and it should make you feel more like yourself, not less. People started noticing the change in you, the confidence you'd developed, the way you carried yourself differently, and their observations caught me off guard because from inside the process, it had felt so gradual. My coworker Jennifer asked if I'd been working out, commenting that I seemed different somehow, more present and engaged in meetings. A woman at my gym struck up a conversation and later asked for my number, something that would have been unthinkable months ago when I'd radiated misery and unavailability. My sister said I sounded happier on our phone calls, that my laugh seemed real again instead of forced. Even strangers seemed to respond to me differently. Baristas were friendlier, people held eye contact longer, social interactions felt easier and more natural. The confidence wasn't something I'd consciously cultivated or faked until I felt it. It had emerged organically from months of keeping promises to myself, from proving I could survive what I'd thought would destroy me, from building a life that felt full and meaningful without romantic partnership. I'd learned I could be alone without being lonely, could enjoy my own company, could build a future that excited me even if I was the only person in it. That self-sufficiency was attractive to others, I realized. But more importantly, it was attractive to me. I actually liked who I was becoming, looked forward to discovering what else I was capable of, felt curious about life in a way I hadn't since those early, hopeful days of college. The way you carried yourself differently was something I noticed most in photographs. Old pictures from before the breakup showed a version of me that looked younger and somehow smaller, like I'd been taking up less space in the world. Recent photos showed someone who stood straighter, smiled more genuinely, looked directly at the camera with an openness that suggested comfort in my own skin. My fashion sense had evolved too, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I was finally dressing for myself, choosing clothes that reflected who I was rather than playing it safe or deferring to someone else's preferences. I'd grown a beard, let my hair get a little longer, made choices about my appearance that were purely about what I liked rather than what I thought others might prefer. You weren't trying to prove anything to anyone. You were just genuinely becoming a better version of yourself through the healing process. And that authenticity was key to why the transformation felt so solid. In those early gym sessions, I'd been partly motivated by revenge fantasies of her seeing me looking amazing and regretting her choice. I'd imagined scenarios where we'd run into each other and she'd be stunned by how good I looked, would realize what she'd given up. But somewhere along the way, that motivation had faded and been replaced by something healthier. I was working out because it made me feel strong and capable, because I enjoyed the challenge and the routine and the clarity it brought to my mind. The transformation wasn't for her anymore. It was for me. The same shift had happened with work. I'd initially thrown myself into my career partly to distract from the pain and partly to build a life so impressive she'd regret leaving. But as I'd advanced and taken on new challenges, the motivation became intrinsic. I was good at my job. I enjoyed the problem solving and the leadership aspects of my new role. I took genuine pride in my team's accomplishments. Success at work wasn't about showing her what she was missing anymore. It was about building a career that fulfilled me and provided financial security and challenged me to grow. The focus had shifted from external validation to internal satisfaction, and that made all the difference in sustainability. Even my social life had transformed from something I was rebuilding out of necessity to something I genuinely valued and enjoyed. Those early friend hangouts had sometimes felt like going through the motions, showing up because I knew I should, but not really being present. Now I looked forward to basketball with Marcus, to poker nights with Jake's group, to trying new restaurants with my cousin. I joined a recreational volleyball league that played Tuesday nights, adding another anchor to my week and another group of people who knew me only as this current version, untainted by the story of who I'd been when I was broken. These friendships and activities weren't consolation prizes for not having a relationship. They were valuable in their own right, fulfilling needs for connection and fun and challenge that had nothing to do with romance. The healing process had fundamentally changed how I thought about relationships and what I wanted from them. Dr. Chen had helped me understand that I'd been looking for completion in a partner, someone to make me whole, when really I'd needed to become whole on my own first. My ex leaving had felt like losing a part of myself because I'd made her responsible for my happiness and sense of worth. But after months of building a life that felt full and meaningful on its own, I realized that any future relationship should be about two complete people choosing to share their lives, not two incomplete people clinging to each other out of need. That was a more mature understanding of love than I'd had before, one that could only have come from being broken and rebuilding myself piece by piece. I'd learned to be comfortable with uncertainty, to tolerate not knowing what came next without letting it paralyze me. The old me had needed concrete plans and assurances, had clung to the illusion of control that came from mapping out a future with someone. The breakup had shattered that illusion brutally, showing me that you could do everything right and still lose, that other people's choices were ultimately beyond your control. That lesson could have made me cynical or closed off, but instead it had made me more open and present. If I couldn't control the future anyway, I might as well enjoy the present. Might as well take risks and try new things and let life surprise me. That mindset was freeing in ways I couldn't have imagined during the relationship. My relationship with myself had undergone the biggest transformation of all. I'd learned to listen to my own needs and advocate for them instead of always accommodating others. I discovered I could trust my own judgment, could make good decisions, could handle disappointment and setbacks without falling apart. The hours I'd spent alone, initially forced upon me by the breakup, had taught me that my own company was actually pretty good. I'd learned to cook properly, discovered I enjoyed it, started experimenting with new recipes on weekends. I'd started reading again, something I'd loved in college but had drifted away from, and found that books provided both escape and insight in equal measure. I'd taken up guitar, something I'd always wanted to try but had never prioritized, and discovered that being bad at something new was actually fun and humbling in good ways. 8 months after the breakup, I realized one day that I'd gone an entire week without thinking about her once, not obsessively checking what she was doing, not wondering if she was happy, not replaying our relationship or imagining different endings, just living my life, focused on my own goals and relationships and challenges, existing as a complete person who'd had a painful breakup in his past but wasn't defined by it anymore. When I noticed this milestone, I felt a surge of something that might have been pride or might have been relief or might have been a mixture of both. I'd done it. I'd survived something I thought would destroy me, and I'd come out the other side not just intact but better than before. The transformation. It wasn't about becoming someone else entirely or erasing who I'd been. It was about becoming more fully myself than I'd been allowed to be in a relationship where I was constantly adjusting to fit someone else's needs and expectations. The breakup had forced me to confront parts of myself I'd been avoiding, to develop strengths I'd let atrophy, to build a life that was genuinely mine rather than a compromise between two people's visions. And while I wouldn't have chosen this path if given the option, wouldn't wish this kind of pain on anyone, I had to admit that the person I was becoming was someone I actually admired and respected and enjoyed being. That was worth something, maybe worth everything. You met someone new, and it happened naturally when you weren't even looking, which was probably the only reason it could happen at all. I'd reached a place where I was genuinely content with my single life, not just pretending to be okay while secretly hoping someone would rescue me from loneliness. My therapist, Dr. Chen, had warned me about getting into anything new too quickly, about making sure I'd done the healing work before opening myself up to someone else, and I'd taken that advice seriously. For months, I'd declined setups from well-meaning friends, had politely turned down women who'd expressed interest, had focused entirely on myself and my own growth. But 10 months after the breakup, I was finally in a place where I felt whole on my own, where a relationship seemed like something that could enhance my life rather than complete it. Maybe it was at a coffee shop, through friends, or at a work event. In my case, it was a bookstore, of all places, on a random Saturday afternoon when I'd stopped in to browse the new releases. I was standing in the fiction section, trying to decide between two novels, when someone next to me laughed softly. I looked over and saw a woman about my age holding up a book with an absolutely ridiculous cover. A shirtless man riding a dinosaur, or something equally absurd. "I want to read this ironically," she said. Not really to me, but also not to me. But I'm worried I'll actually enjoy it and have to reevaluate my entire taste in literature. Her smile was warm and slightly mischievous, and I found myself smiling back without overthinking it. We ended up talking for 20 minutes, right there in the aisle. One of those conversations that flows effortlessly from books to movies to completely random topics. The kind of interaction that feels simultaneously brand new and strangely familiar. Her name was Rachel. She was a graphic designer who just moved to the city 6 months ago for work, and she had this way of being completely present in the conversation that I'd forgotten was even possible. She actually listened when I talked instead of just waiting for her turn to speak, asked follow-up questions that showed she was paying attention, laughed at my jokes in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. When she mentioned she was new to the city and still finding her favorite spots, I surprised myself by offering to show her the good coffee places sometime, and she surprised me by immediately taking out her phone to exchange numbers. She was different, more mature, more communicative, more present, and those differences were apparent from our very first actual date a few days later. We met at a coffee shop I'd suggested, one of my favorites that I discovered during my post-breakup reconstruction phase, and from the moment Rachel sat down, I could feel that this was something new. She asked real questions about my life. Not just surface-level getting-to-know-you stuff, but genuine curiosity about what I thought and felt and valued. When I asked about her previous relationships, she answered honestly, without either trash-talking her exes or idealizing them, just matter-of-factly explaining what had worked and what hadn't, and what she'd learned. There was an emotional intelligence to the way she communicated that felt adult, in a way I hadn't experienced before. There was no drama, no comparisons to exes, no games, and the absence of those things was so striking, I almost didn't know how to handle it. Rachel said what she meant and meant what she said, a straightforward communication style that eliminated the anxiety of trying to decode hidden meanings or read between lines. When she wanted to see me again, she said so directly instead of playing hard to get or waiting for me to make all the moves. When something bothered her, like when I was late to our third date because of a work emergency, she mentioned it calmly and we talked it through instead of her letting it fester into resentment. There was none of the push-pull dynamic I'd experienced before, none of the feeling that I was constantly auditioning for a role or trying to prove my worth, just genuine connection and mutual respect. The kind of foundation that made everything else feel easy in ways I hadn't known relationships could be. We enjoyed each other's company without needing constant entertainment or stimulation. And we could sit in comfortable silence, reading our books in the same room, could have fun doing absolutely nothing together, could be ourselves without performance or pretense. Rachel had her own full life with friends and interests and career ambitions, and she never made me feel like I was responsible for her happiness or like she was trying to merge our lives into one. We added to each other's lives instead of consuming them, maintained our independence while building something together, and that balance felt revolutionary after my previous relationship, where boundaries had been so blurry. You took things slow, protecting your heart while allowing yourself to be vulnerable again, and that careful pace was something I insisted on, despite Rachel's obvious interest in moving forward. After our fifth date, when the chemistry between us was undeniable and she'd made it clear she wanted more, I asked if we could talk seriously for a minute. I told her about my previous relationship, not all the gory details, but enough that she'd understand why I needed to take things slowly, why I needed to be careful about protecting the hard-won stability I'd built. I expected her to be frustrated, or to see it as rejection, but instead she just nodded and said she appreciated my honesty, that she'd rather take things slow and build something solid than rush into something that would fall apart. This new person showed you what a healthy relationship could look like. And the contrast to my previous relationship became more obvious the deeper Rachel and I got. She encouraged me to maintain my friendships and hobbies, instead of expecting me to spend all my free time with her. When I had a bad day at work, she listened and offered support without trying to fix everything or take it personally. When we had disagreements, and we did, because we were two different people with different perspectives, she approached them as problems to solve together rather than battles to win. She apologized when she was wrong without defensiveness, accepted my apologies when I was wrong without holding grudges, and we both assumed good intentions from each other even when we hurt each other's feelings. What it meant to be someone's actual choice rather than their backup plan became crystal clear in how Rachel treated me versus how my ex had. Rachel was excited to introduce me to her friends, didn't keep any part of her life separate or mysterious, talked about future plans that included me without hesitation or caveat. There was no ambiguity about where I stood with her. No wondering if she had one foot out the door, no anxiety about whether someone from her past might show up and render me obsolete. She chose me deliberately and made sure I knew it. Not through grand gestures, but through consistent actions. Showing up when she said she would. Following through on plans. Prioritizing our relationship without sacrificing herself. Being someone's first choice, their actual choice, felt completely different from being someone's consolation prize. You realized your ex had actually done you a favor by leaving, even though it hadn't felt that way at the time, and that realization hit me one evening when Rachel and I were cooking dinner together in my apartment. She was chopping vegetables while I handled the pasta, and we were debating something completely silly, whether pineapple belonged on pizza or some other inconsequential topic. and I just stopped and watched her for a moment. She was laughing at something I had said, completely relaxed and natural in my space, and I felt this profound sense of gratitude for exactly where I was. If my ex hadn't left, I'd still be in that relationship that looked fine on the surface but was slowly eroding my sense of self. I never would have done the work to become this version of myself, never would have learned what I actually needed and deserved, and never would have been available when Rachel walked into my life. Even though it hadn't felt that way at the time it had felt like the worst thing that could possibly happen, like my life was ending, like I'd never recover or be happy again. But sitting in my apartment with Rachel, having rebuilt myself from the ground up, and found someone who valued me for who I actually was, rather than who I could be molded into, I could see the blessing hidden in that trauma. The breakup had been brutal, but necessary, a painful course correction that had ultimately steered me towards something better. My ex leaving had felt like rejection, but was actually liberation, freeing me from a relationship that was never going to fulfill me, and clearing space for growth I desperately needed, but wouldn't have pursued if I'd stayed comfortable. 3 months into dating Rachel, we had our first serious conversation about exclusivity and what we wanted from the relationship. She approached it with typical directness, saying she wasn't seeing anyone else and didn't want to, and asking if I felt the same way. I did, had for weeks, but had been too cautious to say it, still protecting that wounded part of myself that remembered what it felt like to be all in with someone who had one foot out the door. But Rachel had earned my trust through consistency and honesty, through showing up fully and asking me to do the same. So I took a breath and let myself be vulnerable, told her I wanted to be exclusive, that I was falling for her. And it scared me, but I wanted to lean into it rather than run away. She didn't make fun of my fear or try to minimize it. She just reached across the table and took my hand and said she was scared too, that putting your heart out there was always frightening, but she thought we were worth the risk. That moment of mutual vulnerability, of both of us acknowledging the stakes while choosing to move forward anyway, felt more intimate than anything physical. We were building something real, with full awareness of how precious and fragile it was, with commitment to protect it while also letting it grow. The relationship with my ex had felt carelessly certain, like we'd stumbled into love without considering whether we were actually compatible. This felt different. Deliberate, chosen, constructed with care and intention. The differences extended to every aspect of how we related to each other. Rachel respected my time and boundaries. If I needed a night alone to recharge or had plans with friends, she didn't take it as rejection or make me feel guilty. She celebrated my successes at work without feeling threatened by them, asked questions about my projects, and genuinely listened to the answers. When I hit the gym, she didn't complain about time away from her, but sometimes joined me for yoga classes or runs, sharing the activity without making it about monitoring me. She had her own ambitions and challenges and didn't expect me to be her therapist or life coach, but she did share what was going on and let me support her when she needed it. Our communication patterns were night and day compared to my previous relationship. With my ex, I'd often felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate her moods and needs, analyzing every text for hidden meaning. With Rachel, everything was straightforward. If she needed space, she said so. If she wanted to see me, she said that too. If something I did bothered her, she brought it up calmly instead of letting it build into resentment. And she encouraged the same honesty from me, created a dynamic where I felt safe expressing my needs and concerns without fear of drama or punishment. That safety was everything. It allowed me to relax and be myself instead of constantly performing or proving my worth. The physical relationship developed naturally too, without pressure or game playing. We'd kissed on our second date, and the attraction was obvious, but we'd taken our time letting things progress further. When we finally did sleep together about 6 weeks into dating, it felt like a natural extension of the emotional intimacy we'd been building rather than a milestone to check off or a test to pass. Rachel approached physical intimacy the same way she approached everything else, with honest communication about what she wanted and liked, with attention to what I wanted and liked, with the understanding that we were exploring this together rather than performing for each other. The vulnerability of that, of being truly seen and accepted, was more profound than any physical sensation. My friends noticed the difference too. Marcus commented that I seemed more settled, more like myself than he'd seen me in years. Even before the breakup, he'd said, "You were kind of on edge all the time with her. With Rachel, you just seem easy, happy." My sister loved Rachel immediately when I finally introduced them, pulled me aside afterward to say, "This is what I always wanted for you, someone who matches your energy instead of draining it." Even my coworkers noticed I was in a good mood more consistently, less stressed, more engaged. A healthy relationship apparently radiates outward, affecting every area of life, just like an unhealthy one does, but in the opposite direction. 4 months in, Rachel met some of my college friends who were visiting town for the weekend, and watching her interact with them highlighted another difference from my previous relationship. My ex had always been slightly territorial at social events, needing my attention even when I was catching up with old friends, feeling threatened by inside jokes or stories from before her time. Rachel was completely comfortable, asked them questions about the stories they were telling, laughed at the embarrassing details about younger me, fit into the group naturally without trying to compete for my attention. Afterward, my friend Jake pulled me aside and said, "Dude, she's great. Completely different vibe from the last one. Don't screw this up." I didn't plan to screw it up, but I was also aware that every relationship is easy at the beginning when you're both on your best behavior and haven't encountered real challenges yet. The true test would come when life got hard, when we faced actual stress or conflict or disappointment. That test came about 5 months in when I made a mistake at work that cost my company a major client, putting my promotion and maybe even my job in jeopardy. I was devastated, beating myself up over the error, spiraling into anxiety about my career and my worth and whether I'd destroyed everything I'd built. I almost canceled our plans that weekend, not wanting Rachel to see me like this, but she'd insisted on coming over anyway. She showed up with Thai food and listened while I explained what had happened, didn't try to minimize it or offer false reassurances that everything would be fine. Instead, she just sat with me in the difficulty of it, acknowledged that it was a real setback while reminding me that one mistake didn't define my entire career or my value as a person. She helped me strategize how to address it at work, offered to help me update my resume just in case, while also believing I could recover from this. Most importantly, she didn't make it about her. Didn't complain that my bad mood was ruining our weekend. Didn't take my stress personally. Just showed up consistently and supportively until the crisis passed. That's when I knew this was different. That Rachel was someone who would be there through the hard times. Not just the good ones. The situation at work did eventually get resolved. I had to eat some humble pie and work my ass off to rebuild trust. But they kept me on, and my boss later said she appreciated how I'd handled the aftermath. But what mattered more was learning that Rachel could handle me at my worst, could see me fail and struggle and still choose to stay. My ex had left at the first sign of something she perceived as better coming along. Rachel stayed through an actual crisis and made me feel loved, even when I felt like a failure. That loyalty and steadiness was something I'd never experienced before in a romantic relationship, and it changed my entire understanding of what partnership could mean. 6 months into our relationship, I realized I'd stopped comparing Rachel to my ex entirely. In the beginning, I'd caught myself doing it constantly, noting every way Rachel was different, better, healthier. But at some point, those comparisons had fallen away because this relationship existed entirely on its own terms. It wasn't defined by what had come before it. Rachel was just Rachel, someone I cared about deeply for who she was, not because she wasn't someone else. The past had released its grip on me completely, and I was fully present in this new chapter, excited about where it might lead without needing guarantees or certainty about the destination. Then your phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, and the timing was almost comically ironic considering where my life had finally gotten to. It was a Friday evening, about 11 months after the breakup, and I was at Rachel's apartment helping her hang some artwork she'd bought for her living room. We'd been laughing about my complete lack of spatial judgment when it came to centering things on walls, and my phone was sitting on her coffee table when it lit up with the notification. I picked it up absently, expecting a text from Marcus about our basketball game the next day, or maybe my mom checking in like she did every Friday. Instead, I saw a message from a number I didn't have saved anymore, but one I'd once known by heart, had texted thousands of times, had stared at desperately during those dark weeks after she left. Your stomach dropped when you read it. It was her, and even though I deleted her contact information months ago, even though I'd done everything possible to remove her from my life, I recognized the number instantly. Some things get burned into your memory whether you want them there or not. "Hey, how have you been?" the message read, accompanied by a smiley emoji. Casual and friendly, like we were old acquaintances catching up after a natural period of distance rather than two people whose last interaction had been her walking out to be with someone else. The simplicity of it was almost offensive. 4 words that completely ignored the devastation she'd left in her wake, the months of pain I'd endured, the person I'd had to become in order to survive losing her. Just, "Hey, how have you been?" Like she was entitled to an answer, like I owed her an update on my life. After months of silence, she was reaching out with a casual tone that showed either remarkable tone deafness or calculated manipulation, and I couldn't immediately tell which. There had been zero contact since that night she'd packed her things from my apartment. No texts, no calls, no accidental run-ins despite living in the same city. The silence had been absolute and initially agonizing, but eventually it had been exactly what I needed to heal without false hope or breadcrumb communication keeping me tethered to someone who'd chosen someone else. Now, just when I'd finally moved on, just when I'd built something new and healthy and real with Rachel, she was breaking that silence. The timing felt intentional somehow, like she had a sixth sense for the moment when I no longer needed her and chose exactly then to reappear. Like she hadn't destroyed you, and the casual tone of the message made me irrationally angry in a way I hadn't expected after all this time. Rachel noticed immediately. I must have made a face or gone still in a way that caught her attention. "Everything okay?" she asked, and I appreciated that she asked without immediately trying to look at my phone or demanding to know what was wrong. I took a breath and showed her the message, explained who it was from, watched her face as she processed this development. To her credit, Rachel didn't freak out or get jealous or insecure. She just read the message, handed my phone back, and asked, "How do you feel about that?" Which was exactly the right question, and probably what Dr. Chen would have asked too. You stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions that I couldn't immediately untangle or name. Anger was definitely in there. Anger at her audacity, at her terrible timing, at the entitlement implicit in thinking she could just pop back into my life whenever she felt like it. But there was also curiosity, that old familiar pull of wanting to know what she wanted, whether she was happy, what had prompted this contact after so many months. And underneath everything was a sort of vindication, a small, satisfied feeling that she'd reached out just when I genuinely stopped caring, when I had someone new and was thriving without her. Part of me wanted her to know how well I was doing, how completely I'd moved on, how little power she had over me anymore. Part of you wanted to ignore it completely, to maintain the boundary I'd worked so hard to establish and protect the peace I'd built. I'd blocked her number, originally for a reason, to remove the temptation to reach out during weak moments, to create space for healing, to make a clean break that would allow both of us to move forward separately. She'd clearly gotten a new number, or was texting from someone else's phone, but the principle remained the same. I didn't owe her a response just because she'd decided she wanted one. The closure I'd needed, I'd had to create for myself through therapy and time and hard work. I didn't need anything from her anymore, which meant I could simply delete the message and continue with my evening like nothing had happened. Part of you was curious about what she wanted, and that curiosity was human and understandable, even if acting on it was potentially dangerous. Why reach out now, after nearly a year of nothing? What could she possibly have to say that would be worth disrupting the silence? Was she happy with her ex? Had that worked out the way she'd hoped when she'd blown up our relationship for unfinished business? Did she want to apologize? Or was this just a casual check-in from someone who'd processed the relationship completely differently than I had? The questions multiplied in my mind, and I recognized this spiral for what it was. The beginning of giving her power over my emotional state again, of letting her back into my headspace when I'd worked so hard to evict her from it. The old you would have responded immediately, desperate for any crumb of attention from her. And I could remember that version of myself with painful clarity. The guy who'd spent those first few weeks checking his phone obsessively, hoping for a message that never came, who would have given anything for her to reach out and say she'd made a mistake. That version of me would have read way too much into this simple message, would have crafted and deleted a dozen responses trying to find the perfect tone, would have dropped everything, including Rachel, to chase the possibility of winning back someone who'd already shown me I was second choice. That guy had been pathetic in his neediness, and I felt a flash of protective anger toward him, toward the wounded person I'd been who deserved better than to be manipulated by someone reaching out on a whim. But you'd changed, and that change was evident in how I was handling this moment versus how I would have handled it a year ago. I wasn't spiraling into panic or immediately trying to decode what the message meant. I wasn't feeling that desperate pull to respond instantly, to be available whenever she decided she wanted my attention. Instead, I was sitting with the feelings, observing them with the kind of self-awareness Dr. Chen had helped me develop, recognizing that I could feel multiple things at once without being controlled by any of them. I could be curious without acting on the curiosity. I could acknowledge old feelings without letting them dictate current actions. The message didn't have to mean anything unless I decided it meant something. You let the message sit unanswered for days while you processed what her reaching out might mean, and that restraint felt like a victory, even though no one else would ever know about it. I put my phone face down on Rachel's coffee table and went back to helping her hang artwork, choosing to be present in my actual life rather than being pulled back into a past that was done. Rachel didn't push me to talk about it more if I didn't want to, but she also made it clear she was available if I did want to process it. And that secure attachment style was such a contrast to my ex's way of handling anything that threatened her. We finished with the artwork, made dinner together, watched a movie, and had a normal evening that wasn't hijacked by drama from my past. Saturday morning, I woke up to 2 more messages from the unknown number. I know it's been a while, just thought it would be nice to catch up. Followed a few hours later by, no pressure, just checking in. The escalation from 1 casual message to 3 in less than 24 hours told me something. She'd expected a response and was getting anxious about not receiving one. The old me would have felt guilty for leaving her hanging, would have rushed to reassure her and respond. The new me recognized this pattern for what it was. Someone who was used to having access to me getting uncomfortable with boundaries. Someone testing whether I was still available to her emotionally. The fact that I'd let the messages sit overnight clearly bothered her, and that told me this wasn't just an innocent check-in. I showed Rachel the new messages over breakfast, and she raised her eyebrows. She's persistent, Rachel observed without judgment, just statement of fact. What do you want to do? Again, the right question, Not what should I do or what would make Rachel feel secure, but what did I actually want? I realized I didn't know yet, that I needed more time to sit with it, and that was okay. Rachel kissed me and said she was going to the gym and then running errands, that I should take whatever time I needed to think it through, and that support without neediness or jealousy was exactly why this relationship worked. She trusted me to handle this in whatever way felt right, and that trust made me even less interested. In engaging with my ex's messages, I spent that weekend really examining what I was feeling and what I wanted. Dr. Chen had taught me to check in with my body when I was confused about emotions. Where was I feeling things physically? When I thought about responding to my ex, I felt tension in my chest and shoulders, a tightness that suggested stress and danger rather than curiosity or longing. When I thought about Rachel and our plans for the following week, I felt warmth and relaxation, an ease that came from being with someone who felt like home. My body was telling me what my mind already knew, but maybe needed confirmation on engaging with my ex. Served no positive purpose and risked destabilizing something. Good, but I also recognized that part of me wanted to respond. Not because I wanted her back, but because I wanted her to see how well I was doing. Wanted her to know that I'd not only survived, but thrived after she'd left. That impulse was about ego more than genuine desire for connection, about proving something rather than building something. And I tried to sit with why I felt the need to prove anything at all. Hadn't I already proven it to the person who mattered most, myself? Did I really need her validation or acknowledgement of my growth? The answer was no, but the temptation was still there, which told me I hadn't completely released the pain of how our relationship ended. That was okay. Healing wasn't linear, and some wounds left scars that occasionally ached. By Monday morning, the unanswered messages sat at 3, and I still hadn't decided whether to respond or how. I talked it through with Marcus over basketball, presented it as a hypothetical at first before admitting it was actually happening. Marcus's advice was predictably blunt. Block the number and move on. She made her choice. You made yours. There's nothing to be gained from rehashing old shit. He had a point, but I also felt like leaving it completely unanswered was the coward's way out somehow, avoiding rather than actively choosing. I wanted my non-response to be a choice, not just paralysis or fear, and maybe that meant I needed to respond once just to create closure on my own terms. Tuesday evening, 3 full days after the initial message, I finally sat down to craft a response. I wrote and deleted a dozen versions, some angry, some cold, some trying too hard to sound casual and unaffected. Finally, I landed on something simple and honest. I'm doing well. I've moved on and built a good life. I think it's best we don't reconnect. I wish you well. It wasn't cruel, but it was clear. Established a boundary without being dramatic about it. Acknowledged her message without inviting further conversation. I showed it to Rachel before sending it, and she nodded her approval. That sounds healthy, she said. You're not being mean. You're just being clear about your boundaries. I hit send before I could overthink it further, and immediately felt a weight lift that I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying those few days. The response came within minutes. Clearly, she'd been waiting for me to finally engage. Can we talk? I'd really like to explain some things. Maybe meet for coffee. The request for more, for escalation from texting to actual contact, confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't just a casual check-in. She wanted something, needed something from me, and was building up to asking for it. The old me might have been curious enough to take that meeting, to hear what explanations she thought could possibly matter at this point. The new me recognized it as a trap, an opening that would lead to complications I didn't need or want. I don't think that's a good idea, I responded, more quickly this time now that I'd made my decision. Well, I'm in a relationship, and I'm happy. Whatever you need to say, I hope you can find closure in other ways. Take care. And then, before she could respond again, I finally did what I probably should have done from the first message. I blocked the unknown number. If she reached out from yet another number, I'd block that one too. I'd set my boundary clearly, and now I was enforcing it, not out of anger or spite, but out of self-protection and respect for what I'd built with Rachel. The past had tried to reach into my present, and I'd chosen my present. That felt like the final test of whether I'd really healed and I'd passed. More messages came, each one progressively more revealing, and she found ways around the blocks I'd put in place with a determination that would have been impressive if it wasn't so frustrating. She created a new Instagram account with a slightly different username and sent me a DM. She messaged me through Facebook, even though I rarely used it. She even reached out via LinkedIn, which felt particularly desperate and inappropriate. Our professional networking site wasn't the place for personal relationship drama. Each new avenue she found told me this wasn't casual interest or friendly concern. This was someone who needed something from me badly enough to keep pushing past clearly established boundaries, and that persistence made me increasingly uncomfortable rather than flattered. She started with small talk. Those first few messages after I'd blocked her initial number, testing the waters with safe, innocuous topics. Through Instagram, she commented on a photo I'd posted from a work event. Looks like things are going well. That's great to see. Through Facebook, she sent a message, asking if I still went to our old coffee shop. saying she'd been there recently and it made her think of me. The tone was carefully casual, almost performatively friendly, like we were old buddies who'd simply drifted apart through natural circumstances, rather than two people whose relationship had ended with her choosing someone else. She was trying to ease back into my life gradually, to normalize communication before revealing what she actually wanted, and the manipulation was obvious to me now in ways it never would have been before therapy. Then moved to nostalgia about your relationship. And once she saw I was at least reading the messages even if I wasn't responding with much substance, she escalated. Remember that weekend we went to the cabin upstate? I was thinking about that the other day. How perfect it was. Another message. I heard that song we used to love on the radio and it made me smile thinking about us dancing in your kitchen. She was pulling out specific memories, our greatest hits, things she knew had been meaningful to both of us. The strategy was transparent. She was trying to remind me of the good times, to make me nostalgic for what we'd had, to create an emotional opening she could exploit. What she didn't realize was that I'd already done the work of processing those memories, had learned to appreciate them as part of my history without needing to recreate them, then finally admitted things with her ex hadn't worked out. And there it was, the real reason she was reaching out after nearly a year of silence. The message came through Facebook Messenger on a Wednesday evening. I need to be honest with you about something. Things with Derek didn't work out the way I hoped. I think I made a mistake. Derek, hearing his name after all this time, was jarring. She'd barely mentioned him by name when we were together. Had just called him my ex, like he was a generic placeholder from her past, rather than a specific person she'd apparently never stopped thinking about. Now he had a name again, had been real enough and present enough in her life to disappoint her again, and she was turning to me as, what, a backup plan? A safe harbor after the storm she'd chosen? He had been the same person he'd always been. The same problems that broke them up the first time had resurfaced, and she detailed some of this in subsequent messages that got progressively longer and more emotional. He'd been jealous and controlling, just like before. He'd wanted all her attention, but didn't make time for her when it was convenient for him. He'd made promises about changing and growing, but had fallen back into the same patterns within months. She wrote paragraphs about feeling disappointed and disillusioned, about realizing that nostalgia had clouded her judgment, about understanding too late that you can't go back and expect things to be different if the fundamental issues were never addressed. I read these messages with detachment, almost anthropological interest in her perspective, but without the emotional investment she was clearly hoping for. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd been confused, that she realized what she had with you was special, and those words that might have meant everything 11 months ago now felt hollow and self-serving. And what we had was real, she wrote. You treated me so well and I took it for granted. I can see that now. You were the best boyfriend I ever had, and I was too confused to appreciate it. She was saying all the things the old me had desperately wanted to hear during those dark weeks after the breakup. The validation and acknowledgement and regret that might have felt like a balm to my wounded ego. But timing mattered, and these words coming now, after she'd tried and failed with someone else, after I'd done the painful work of healing and moving on, felt less like genuine revelation and more like strategic manipulation. That she realized what she had with you was special. But I noticed how her realization had only come after her other option disappeared. She hadn't woken up one day in a happy relationship with Derek and thought, I've made a terrible mistake. I need to reach out to my ex and apologize. She'd waited until she was alone and unhappy to suddenly remember my value. That told me everything about what I'd actually meant to her. I was the good option she'd appreciate when the exciting option wasn't available anymore. I was the safe choice she'd return to after the risky choice didn't pay off. And that realization, rather than making me feel vindicated or powerful, just made me feel sad for both of us. Sad that she didn't know how to value something good when she had it, and sad for the person I'd been who would have accepted this secondary position. Through mutual friends, you learned more of the truth. He'd actually dumped her, not the other way around, and this information came to me almost by accident. I'd been having dinner with Marcus and his girlfriend when she casually mentioned running into my ex at a party the previous weekend. She seemed pretty down, Emily said. She was telling everyone Derek broke up with her out of nowhere, that she was blindsided by it. I felt kind of bad for her, honestly. Marcus shot Emily a look that said maybe this wasn't the best dinner conversation, but the damage was done. Or rather, the truth was revealed. My ex had been reaching out to me, not because she'd done the work of reflection and realized her mistake, but because she'd been rejected again and was looking for comfort and validation wherever she could find it. She was reaching out because she was alone and regretful, not because she'd suddenly realized your worth. And understanding her actual motivation changed everything about how I viewed her messages. Every nostalgic memory she'd brought up, every acknowledgement of my good qualities, every admission that she'd made a mistake, all of it was filtered through this new context. She wasn't reaching out because she'd done genuine self-reflection about our relationship and concluded I was valuable. She was reaching out because she was hurt and lonely, and I represented a proven source of comfort and support. I was the emotional equivalent of comfort food, Not exciting, not her first choice, but reliable and available and guaranteed to make her feel better about herself. That realization was clarifying in the least flattering way possible. I spent a few days sitting with this new information before deciding how to proceed. Part of me wanted to call her out on the bullshit, to confront her with the truth that I knew she'd been dumped and was only reaching out because she had nowhere else to turn. But that would require engaging at a level that gave her more access to me than she deserved. Would open a conversation that could spiral into exactly the kind of drama I'd worked so hard to leave behind. Dr. Chen's voice in my head reminded me that not every thought needs to be voiced. That sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. I didn't owe my ex a confrontation or an explanation or a detailed accounting of why her behavior was shitty. I just owed myself the protection of maintaining my boundaries. But I did mention it to Rachel because keeping secrets felt wrong, even if the secret was just information about my ex. We were at her apartment and I told her what Marcus's girlfriend had said. Explained that my ex was apparently reaching out not from a place of genuine reflection, but from a place of rejection and need. Rachel listened thoughtfully and then asked the question I'd been avoiding. Does knowing that change anything for you? I thought about it, really thought about it, and realized it didn't. Whether my ex was reaching out because she'd realized my worth or because she was desperate for validation, the answer was the same. I didn't want to go backwards. Didn't want to be anyone's second choice or backup plan. And I was happy with what I'd built with Rachel. It makes me feel a little sorry for her, I admitted to Rachel. But it also makes me grateful. Grateful that I'm not in that cycle anymore. That I'm not waiting around hoping she'll realize what she gave up. I think a year ago, if she'd come back, I might have taken her back even knowing I was second choice. Now I can't even imagine it. Rachel smiled and squeezed my hand, and I appreciated that she wasn't threatened by this situation. Wasn't demanding I prove my commitment or making me feel guilty for having a past. She was secure enough in us to let me process this at my own pace. Confident that I was choosing her actively rather than just defaulting to her because other options weren't available. The messages from my ex continued for another week, getting progressively more desperate and revealing. She sent long paragraphs about how much she missed me, about how our relationship had been the most stable and healthy she'd ever experienced, about how she understood now that excitement and passion weren't the same as actual compatibility and partnership. She said she'd been in therapy. That detail felt pointed, like she was trying to prove she'd done work on herself, and her therapist had helped her see patterns in her relationships. She asked if we could talk on the phone, said there were things she needed to explain that were too complicated for text. Each message was a tiny escalation, testing to see what might get through my defenses and create the opening she needed. But I'd already made my decision. After consulting with Dr. Chen in our weekly session, after talking it through with Rachel, after sitting with my own feelings and examining them honestly, I knew what I needed to do. I composed one final message, sent it through Facebook since that seemed to be her preferred current platform, and then blocked her there too. I've seen your messages, and I understand you're going through a difficult time, I wrote. I'm sorry you're hurting, but I can't be your source of comfort or support. We both need to move forward separately. I'm asking you to please stop reaching out. I wish you healing and happiness, but it can't involve me. Take care. It was firm without being cruel, final without being dramatic, and most importantly, it was honest about what I could and couldn't offer. Her response came within minutes. I saw it pop up just before I hit the block button. Please, just give me one chance to explain in person. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you. What we had was too special to throw away without at least talking. The pleading tone, the suggestion that I was throwing something away, rather than acknowledging that she'd already thrown it away nearly a year ago, the request for just one chance that I knew would turn into ongoing requests for more chances. All of it confirmed I was making the right choice. I didn't read the rest of the message before blocking her. Whatever else she had to say, I didn't need to hear it. That chapter was closed, and she didn't get to reopen it just because her other story hadn't worked out the way she'd hoped. Marcus texted me later that week. Emily said your ex is telling people you won't even talk to her, making it sound like you're being cruel or immature about it. Just wanted you to know in case it gets back to you. I appreciated the heads up, but found I didn't really care what story she was telling or how she was framing my boundaries to make herself feel better. People who knew me would know that wasn't my character. People who didn't know me well enough to give me the benefit of the doubt weren't people whose opinions mattered. And if she needed to paint me as the villain in her story to cope with her own choices and their consequences, that was her business. I wasn't responsible for managing her narrative or her feelings anymore. What struck me most in all of this was how differently I was handling rejection now, her rejection of me a year ago, versus my rejection of her now. When she'd left me for Derek, I'd taken it as a referendum on my worth, had internalized it as proof I wasn't enough. When I rejected her attempts to reconnect, I felt clear and centered, not guilty or cruel, but simply honest about what served my well-being and what didn't. That difference was everything. It showed how much I'd grown, how thoroughly I'd rebuilt my sense of self-worth on an internal foundation rather than external validation. Her wanting me back didn't make me more valuable than I'd been when she didn't want me. I was the same person either way, and I finally believed that person was enough. The truth that emerged through all her messages and through the information from mutual friends wasn't just about her situation with Derek or her motivations for reaching out. The deeper truth was about patterns and choices and who we become in relationships versus who we are on our own. She'd chosen excitement over stability, nostalgia over present reality, the fantasy of what could be over the reality of what was. Those were her patterns, probably ones she'd repeat until she did serious work on herself. My pattern had been choosing people who weren't fully choosing me, sacrificing my needs to accommodate others, staying in situations that hurt me because leaving seemed harder. But I'd broken that pattern through pain and work and time, and I wasn't going back to it now. That was the real victory. Not that she wanted me back, but that I didn't need her to. She asked to meet up, saying she needed closure or wanted to apologize in person, and the request came through yet another avenue I hadn't thought to block, an email to my work address that she must have found through LinkedIn. "I know you asked me to stop reaching out, and I will after this, I promise," she wrote. "But I really need to see you one last time. I need to apologize properly, face to face, and I need closure. Please, just coffee, 30 minutes, and then I'll leave you alone for good. You deserve better than text message explanations for how badly I hurt you." The email was more articulate than her previous messages, more measured and less desperate, which made it more effective at getting under my defenses. The promise that this would be the last time, the acknowledgement that I deserved better, the framing of it as something I deserved rather than something she needed, it was all carefully constructed to appeal to my sense of fairness. Against your better judgment and the advice of friends, you agreed, and I knew even as I was typing the response that this was probably a mistake. Rachel's face when I told her was carefully neutral, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Are you sure that's what you want?" she asked, not trying to control my decision, but making sure I was really thinking it through. Marcus was less diplomatic. "Dude, what the fuck? She's had almost a year to apologize. This is a trap, and you're walking right into it." Dr. Chen, in our session, asked me to examine what I was hoping to get from this meeting, whether closure was something I actually needed from her, or if I had already created my own closure through the healing work I'd done. All valid points, all ignored because some part of me was still curious to see her one last time and maybe get answers to questions that had haunted you, questions I thought I'd let go of but apparently hadn't completely. Why had she really left? Had any of it been real? When had she stopped loving me? Or had she ever loved me at all? What had made Derek seem worth throwing away 2 years for? Did she think about me when she was with him? These questions felt like they needed answers, even though logically I knew that whatever she told me wouldn't change anything or undo the pain. But there was something about the unfinished nature of how we'd ended. Her walking out with barely an explanation, the months of silence, the sudden reappearance, that left loose threads I wanted to tie up. So I agreed to meet her that Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop neither of us had history with, a neutral location that wouldn't be loaded with memories. When you met at a neutral location, I arrived 15 minutes early, wanting to be settled and composed before she got there, wanting the psychological advantage of not having to walk in and find her. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a table near the window where I could watch people passing on the street, grounding myself in the present moment and the life I'd built rather than getting pulled into the past. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "You've got this. Remember who you are now, not who you were then. Love you." That message, that easy declaration of love and support without jealousy or manipulation, reminded me exactly what I had to lose if I let this meeting mess with my head. I texted back a heart emoji just as I saw my ex walking up to the coffee shop entrance. She looked different, tired, less confident than you remembered, and that was the first surprise of many that afternoon. The woman who walked through the door wasn't the polished, put-together person who'd left me 11 months ago, so certain that Derek was what she wanted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of styled the way she used to be meticulous about. She wore minimal makeup, and I could see dark circles under her eyes that suggested she wasn't sleeping well. Her clothes were casual to the point of looking thrown on without thought, and she'd lost weight in a way that didn't look healthy or intentional. But more than any physical change, it was her energy that was different, diminished somehow, like someone had turned down her brightness. The confidence that had been one of her most attractive qualities was gone, replaced by something that looked like defeat. She spotted me and attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, then went to order before coming to sit across from me. Up close, the changes were even more apparent. She looked like someone who'd been through something difficult and hadn't quite recovered. Part of me felt a pang of sympathy seeing her like this, remembering that I loved this person once, that her pain was still pain, even if she'd brought it on herself. But I also recognized that sympathy for what it was, human compassion, not romantic feeling, not desire to fix or rescue her. I could feel bad about her situation without making it my responsibility, which was growth I hadn't possessed before. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth, even though it was a mild spring day. I know you probably didn't want to. I really appreciate it. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, less assured, and she wasn't quite making eye contact. This wasn't the person who'd confidently told me she needed to explore her feelings for someone else, who'd packed up her things and walked out without looking back. This was someone broken in ways I recognized from my own experience, and I wondered if Derek had done to her what she'd done to me, discarded her when something else seemed more appealing. The thought should have given me satisfaction, but instead just made me feel tired. She apologized, cried, told you she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, and the words came tumbling out in a rush once she started talking. I don't even know where to begin, she said, her eyes getting red and watery. I was so stupid. I convinced myself that what I felt for Derek was real, that it meant something, that we had all this history and unresolved feelings. I thought you and I were too easy, that it couldn't be real love if it wasn't complicated and dramatic. A tear rolled down her cheek and she wiped it away impatiently, frustrated with herself. But it turns out the drama and complication were just toxicity. And the easy thing with you? That was real love, the kind most people spend their whole lives looking for. And I threw it away for nothing. She wanted another chance, wanted to prove she'd changed, wanted to go back to how things were. And as she laid out her case, I felt like I was watching someone give a presentation they'd rehearsed extensively. She'd been in therapy and learned things about her attachment style and her pattern of chasing unavailable men. She'd done work on herself and understood now why she made the choices she made. She was different now, more mature, more ready for real partnership instead of fantasy. We'd been so good together, had built something rare, and she was asking, begging, for the chance to rebuild it. I know I don't deserve it, she said, reaching across the table like she might take my hand before thinking better of it. I know I burned that bridge and I have no right to ask. But what we had was special, and I think if we both wanted to, we could get that back. Better than before, even. She noticed how good you looked, commented on your transformation, and I could see the moment it fully registered for her that I wasn't the same broken person she'd left behind. You look amazing, she said, taking in the physical changes from months of gym dedication, the new confidence in how I carried myself, the expensive watch Rachel had given me for my birthday that I wore unselfconsciously. You seem really together, happy even. There was something complicated in her expression as she said it, like she'd expected to find me still pining away and was having to recalibrate her entire approach. She asked about my life, what I'd been up to, and I gave her the broad strokes, the promotion, the new apartment, reconnecting with friends, this full life I'd built in her absence, and you could see something in her eyes, regret mixed with jealousy that you'd moved on, and it was that look more than anything, she said, that gave away her real feelings. This wasn't just about missing what we had, or realizing she'd made a mistake in some abstract sense. This was about seeing concrete proof that I'd not only survived, but thrived without her, that I'd become a better version of myself in her absence rather than falling apart permanently. I'd lost weight while she'd gained it. I'd advanced in my career while she'd apparently stalled in hers based on some comments she'd made. I was happy while she was clearly miserable. The equation wasn't supposed to work out this way in her head. She was supposed to be the one who'd moved on to something better while I remained stuck pining for what we'd had. Are you, seeing anyone? She asked, and I could hear the hope in her voice that the answer would be no, that I'd be single and available and possibly still carrying a torch for her. This was the moment of truth, the point where I had to decide how honest to be. I could lie by omission, could avoid mentioning Rachel and leave that door open, could protect my ex's feelings by keeping things vague. The old me might have done that, might have softened the blow or hedged my words to avoid conflict. But that kind of dishonesty didn't serve anyone, and I'd worked too hard on being authentic to start lying now just to make someone else comfortable. Actually, I said, keeping my voice gentle but clear, I've been seeing someone for about 7 months. It's serious. I'm happy. I watched her face as the information landed, saw the hope drain away and something close to panic replace it. She'd been building toward asking me to take her back, I realized. Had scripted this whole conversation with the assumption that I was available and possibly still interested. Finding out I'd moved on, that I'd built something with someone else, wasn't part of her plan. She tried to school her features back to neutral, but I'd seen the flash of desperation, the calculation happening behind her eyes as she tried to figure out if this was an obstacle she could overcome or a door that was fully closed. Oh, she said, her voice small. That's good. I'm happy for you. But she didn't sound happy. She sounded devastated, and a long, awkward silence stretched between us. She stared into her coffee cup like it might have answers, and I felt the weight of her disappointment filling the space. This was why meeting up had been a mistake, I realized. She hadn't wanted closure. She'd wanted a reunion. She hadn't wanted to apologize for my benefit. She'd wanted to apologize, so I would forgive her and take her back. Every word she'd said about learning and growing and being different now had been leading up to a request I couldn't and wouldn't fulfill. And now we were sitting here with the truth hanging between us. She wanted something from me that I wasn't willing to give. I should probably be honest with you, she finally said, and I braced myself for whatever was coming. Derek broke up with me. I didn't end things with him like I might have implied in my messages. He left me for someone else, actually. His coworker. And sitting there in the exact same position you were in a year ago, feeling what you must have felt. I've never been so ashamed of myself. Fresh tears started falling, and this time she didn't wipe them away. I understand now what I put you through. The pain of being left for someone else, of being told you weren't enough, of having someone choose another person over you. It's unbearable. And I did that to you, to someone who loved me and treated me well, and I can't forgive myself for it. The confession should have felt validating. She finally understood what she'd done to me, finally felt the consequences of her choices, but instead it just made me sad. Sad that empathy had only come through experiencing the same pain she'd inflicted. Sad that she needed to be on the receiving end of betrayal to understand how it felt. Sad that we'd both wasted so much time and caused so much hurt chasing people who didn't want us instead of appreciating what we had. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said, and I meant it. I know how much it hurts. I wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone, not even... I trailed off, not wanting to be cruel by completing the thought, not even you, the person who first inflicted it on me. The thing is, she continued, leaning forward with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, going through that made me realize what I lost. You were there for me. You were solid and consistent and kind. You never played games or made me guess how you felt. And I took all of that for granted because it wasn't exciting enough, wasn't dramatic enough. I thought love was supposed to feel like chaos, like that high you get from uncertainty and jealousy and fighting and making up. But that's not love. That's just addiction to emotional volatility. What we had was real love, the kind that makes you feel safe and seen and supported. And I was too immature to recognize it. Her words were probably true, reflected real insight she'd gained through pain and therapy, but they didn't change anything for me. Understanding why she'd made the choices she made didn't undo them or make me want to give her another chance. If anything, knowing that she'd had to lose me and then be hurt the same way to finally appreciate what we'd had just reinforced that taking her back would be a mistake. She didn't want me. She wanted the safety and security I represented. She didn't love this version of me sitting across from her who she barely knew anymore. She loved the memory of someone who'd made her feel good about herself. And that wasn't enough to build anything on. I appreciate you telling me all of this, I said carefully, choosing my words with intention. And I'm glad you've learned from what happened, that you've grown and gained insight. That's important and valuable work. She looked up hopefully, hearing what might sound like an opening. But I've moved on. I'm in a relationship with someone I care about deeply, someone who chose me from the beginning without needing to lose me first to realize what we had. And even if I wasn't with someone else, I don't think going back would be healthy for either of us. We can't recreate what we had before because we're both different people now. And what we had before ended for real reasons. Her face crumpled and the tears came harder now. And I felt terrible for causing her pain, even as I knew I was doing the right thing. Is there any chance? She started, but I shook my head. I'm sorry. No, I think we gave each other what we needed to at that point in our lives. And now we need to let each other go completely. You need to do your healing without me in the picture, and I need to continue building my life with the people who are actually in it. The finality in my voice left no room for argument, and she seemed to shrink into herself, understanding at last that this meeting wasn't going to end the way she'd hoped. We sat in painful silence for a few more minutes before she gathered her things to leave. Thank you for meeting me, she said quietly. And for being kind about it, you have every right to hate me. I didn't hate her, I realized. I didn't feel much of anything for her anymore except a distant compassion and relief that I wasn't in her shoes. I don't hate you, I said honestly. I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. Just not with me. She nodded, unable to speak, and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. I sat there for a long time after she left, processing what had just happened, examining my feelings to make sure I was okay, that I hadn't been pulled back into old patterns or left vulnerable to doubt and second-guessing. But I felt solid, centered, clear about my choices. Seeing her hadn't created the closure she was looking for, but it had given me something valuable. Concrete proof that I was over her, that the person I'd been who loved her was gone, replaced by someone with different priorities and standards. I texted Rachel, "Meeting's done, heading home. Want to come over for dinner?" Her response was immediate. "Already at the store, getting ingredients. See you soon." That simple exchange, the ease and security of someone who was there without drama or complication, reminded me exactly why I'd made the right choice. The attempted reunion had failed before it truly began, not because I was being stubborn or unforgiving, but because I'd grown into someone who knew what he deserved, and it wasn't to be someone's backup plan. She kept reaching out after that meeting, texting, calling, even showing up at places she knew you'd be, and the boundary violation escalated in ways that moved from uncomfortable to genuinely concerning. I'd made my position clear at the coffee shop. I'd moved on, I was with someone else, we weren't getting back together, but she acted like that conversation had never happened. New messages appeared almost daily from different numbers. She must have borrowed from friends or gotten through various apps. My phone would ring at odd hours with unknown callers that I stopped answering. After the third time, it turned out to be her crying and asking me to reconsider. The digital harassment was persistent enough that I started documenting it, taking screenshots and saving voicemails, not because I wanted to take legal action, but because I wanted a record in case it escalated further. Then she started showing up physically at places she knew I'd be. And that's when it crossed from pathetic into frightening. She appeared at my gym one morning, claiming she'd just joined, even though it was clear from her workout clothes that still had tags on them that she'd bought them specifically for this encounter. She was at the coffee shop near my office during my usual lunch hour, acting surprised to see me, even though this place was nowhere near where she lived or worked. Most disturbingly, she somehow found out about my regular basketball games with Marcus and showed up courtside with a book, pretending to just be reading in the park when we both knew there were dozens of parks closer to her apartment. Each appearance came with the same script: surprised recognition, casual conversation attempts, hurt confusion when I kept things brief and distant. She talked about all the good times you'd had, how no one understood her like you did, how the connection you'd shared was rare and worth fighting for. And these messages came in long paragraphs, sent at 2 or 3 in the morning when she was clearly in her feelings and probably drinking. Remember the weekend we drove upstate and got caught in that rainstorm? We laughed so hard we cried. When have you ever laughed like that with anyone else? Another night. You're the only person who ever got my sense of humor, who understood why I'm weird about certain things, who made me feel like I didn't have to perform or pretend. That's not something you just throw away. And another, what we had was rare. Most people go their whole lives without that kind of connection. Are you really going to walk away from it because of one mistake I made when I was confused? The manipulation was obvious. She was trying to make me doubt my decision by romanticizing our past and suggesting that what I had with Rachel couldn't possibly compare. She was attempting to create a narrative where our relationship was this epic, once-in-a-lifetime love story that was being sacrificed on the altar of my stubbornness or pride. But I'd done enough therapy to recognize this tactic for what it was: someone rewriting history to serve their current needs, conveniently forgetting all the ways our relationship had been imperfect, all the times I'd felt like I was doing more emotional labor than her, all the red flags I'd ignored because I was invested in making it work. The good times had been good, but they hadn't been enough to keep her from leaving when something else looked more appealing. She noticed you were seeing someone new, and her messages became more desperate, with increasing references to Rachel, even though I'd been careful not to share details or post about our relationship publicly. I saw on Marcus's Instagram that you brought someone to his birthday party. Is it serious? Came one text, followed hours later by, I'm not trying to interfere with your life. I just need to know if I should really give up hope completely. The fact that she was monitoring my friend's social media, trying to piece together information about my relationship, felt invasive and unhealthy. I'd been deliberately private about Rachel precisely to avoid this kind of scrutiny, but my ex was determined to gather intelligence however she could, like she was planning a military campaign to win me back. She pointed out flaws in your new relationship, reminded you of inside jokes you'd shared, sent photos from your time together, and the tactics became increasingly targeted and personal. I hope your new girlfriend appreciates that you can't sleep without a fan on even in winter, one text read. Does she know about your thing with needing the kitchen cleaned before bed? I always thought that quirk was endearing. She was trying to demonstrate her intimate knowledge of me, to remind me that she knew things about me that Rachel was probably still discovering, as if relationship longevity was measured in trivia collected rather than actual compatibility and trust. She sent photos I didn't even remember her having. Us at a concert, making dinner in my old apartment, that road trip to visit my parents, each image captioned, with memories I'd successfully processed and filed away. The inside jokes were particularly manipulative because they were designed to create moments of artificial intimacy, little reminders that we'd shared a private language that existed between only us. Spotted a guy wearing socks with sandals today and immediately thought, fashion emergency level orange, she texted, referencing our made-up alert system for fashion disasters we'd see in public. Another time, passed our old Thai place and they still have those terrible paintings of cats playing poker on the wall. Made me smile. These messages were crafted to burrow past my defenses, to create little moments of connection that might build into something bigger, but I saw through them. Shared history didn't obligate me to share a future, and nostalgia wasn't love. Part of her seemed genuinely remorseful, but another part seemed more interested in winning you back because you'd moved on, not because she actually valued you. And parsing which motivation was authentic became the central question I had to answer. In some messages, she wrote things that sounded like real self-reflection. I've been working with my therapist on understanding why I run from good things and chase unavailable people. I'm learning that I equated drama with passion because that's what I saw modeled growing up. You represented stability, and that scared me because I didn't think I deserved it. These messages had the ring of genuine insight, of someone doing hard therapeutic work and reaching uncomfortable realizations about themselves. But then other messages revealed a different motivation entirely. I can't stop thinking about you with someone else. It's driving me crazy. You're mine. You've always been mine. How can you just replace me like I meant nothing? The possessiveness was telling. I was hers. Even though she'd left me, I was replacing her even though she'd done the leaving first and with someone specific in mind. This wasn't about regretting the loss of our actual relationship. This was about being territorial over something she'd discarded but didn't want anyone else to have. Like a kid who ignores a toy until another child picks it up, and suddenly it's their favorite thing in the world. The contradiction between these two types of messages, genuine remorse versus possessive entitlement, made it impossible to trust anything she was saying. You had to decide, was this genuine growth and regret? Or was she just upset that you were no longer available and pining for her? I spent days turning this question over in therapy, talking it through with Dr. Chen, who asked probing questions designed to help me see my own blind spots. If she'd reached out with this same level of remorse and insight, but you weren't seeing Rachel, if you were still single, what would you do? Dr. Chen asked. I sat with that question and realized the answer was still no. The issue wasn't that Rachel was in the picture, and therefore my ex's timing was bad. The issue was that my ex had shown me who she was capable of being, someone who could walk away when something shinier appeared, and I had to believe that about her. Past behavior was the best predictor of future behavior, and no amount of therapy or remorse could erase what she'd proven herself capable of. But what if she really has changed? I asked, playing devil's advocate with myself. What if going through this with Derek genuinely taught her something and she won't repeat the pattern? Dr. Chen gave me one of her penetrating looks and asked, why would you want to be the test case for whether her growth is real? Why not let her prove it with someone new who doesn't carry the history and hurt you two share? If her growth is genuine, she should be able to apply those lessons to a fresh start with someone she hasn't already betrayed. The question hit hard because it revealed the flaw in my ex's logic. If she'd really learned and grown, she should be excited to apply those lessons going forward, not fixated on going backward to fix what she'd broken. The truth was that even if her remorse was completely genuine, even if she'd done real work and genuinely understood what she'd given up, it didn't obligate me to give her another chance. People could be genuinely sorry and still not be owed forgiveness or reconciliation. Growth and insight were their own rewards. They didn't entitle you to reclaim something you'd walked away from. My ex seemed to believe that if she could just prove she understood her mistake and had changed, I would have to take her back. Like there was a transactional exchange where sufficient remorse equaled automatic reunion. But relationships didn't work that way. My feelings had changed, my life had moved forward, and I'd built something new that made me happy. Her growth, if it was real, needed to be for her own benefit, not deployed as strategy to win me back. I talked to Rachel about it too, because keeping her in the dark about the extent of my ex's campaign felt wrong, even though part of me wanted to protect her from the drama. We were lying in bed one Sunday morning and I finally told her everything. The multiple messages per day, the showing up at places, the photos and inside jokes, and increasingly desperate tone. I showed her some of the texts, let her see what I was dealing with, expecting her to be angry or jealous or insecure. Instead, Rachel read through them thoughtfully and then said, "She's in a lot of pain. That doesn't make the boundary violations okay, but I can see she's suffering. The question is whether her suffering creates an obligation for you, and I don't think it does." Rachel's compassion towards someone who was essentially trying to undermine our relationship, combined with her clear-eyed assessment that my ex's feelings weren't my responsibility, made me love her even more. She wasn't threatened because she was secure in us, trusted me to handle it, and understood that you could feel empathy for someone's pain without letting it manipulate you into choices that weren't in your best interest. "What do you want to do?" she asked. The same question everyone kept asking because ultimately this was my choice to make. Did I want to keep letting my ex access me through whatever channels she found? Or did I want to take more aggressive steps to cut off contact completely? Marcus was less nuanced in his advice when I finally told him the full extent of what was happening. "Dude, she's borderline stalking you. This isn't romantic or flattering, it's concerning. You need to send one clear message telling her to stop all contact. And if she doesn't, you need to consider a restraining order." The word stalking felt extreme to me at first, but when I really looked at the pattern, the multiple methods of contact after being asked to stop, the showing up at places I frequented, the monitoring of my social media and friends' accounts to gather information about my life, it did fit the definition. I didn't want to think of my ex as someone who would cross those lines. Wanted to believe this was just temporarily poor judgment driven by heartbreak. But the behavior was escalating rather than decreasing, which was a bad sign. I consulted with Dr. Chen about how to handle it, and we crafted what she called a final boundary message. Clear, firm, and documented. I sent it via email so I'd have a record of it, keeping my tone neutral and factual. "I'm asking you clearly and directly to stop contacting me through any medium. No more texts, calls, emails, messages through apps, or showing up at places I'm known to frequent. I've moved on with my life, and I need you to respect that boundary. If you continue to contact me after receiving this message, I'll have no choice but to pursue legal options, including a restraining order. I wish you well, but we cannot have any form of contact going forward. Do not respond to this message. It felt harsh to read it back, almost cruel, but Dr. Chen assured me it was necessary and appropriate given the circumstances. My ex's response came within an hour, and of course she responded despite being explicitly told not to. You can't be serious. A restraining order? For someone who loved you and is trying to make things right? This is so cold and unlike you. The person I knew would never threaten me like this. She's changed you and not for the better. The message confirmed what I'd suspected. She wasn't going to respect my boundary easily, and she was now blaming Rachel for my decisions, as if I didn't have agency or the ability to set my own limits. The fact that she couldn't see how her behavior had necessitated such a firm response, that she framed my boundary as an attack rather than a reasonable reaction to her boundary violations, told me everything I needed to know about whether her growth was genuine. I didn't respond to that message or any of the dozen that followed over the next few days, each one cycling through different emotional appeals: anger, sadness, confusion, guilt, tripping, bargaining. I forwarded them all to a folder I'd created to document the pattern, and I let Marcus and Dr. Chen know what was happening. After a week of daily messages, despite my explicit request for no contact, I consulted with a lawyer about my options. She reviewed the documentation and said I had grounds for a restraining order if I wanted to pursue it, but suggested first trying one more official cease and desist letter on law office letterhead, which often scared people into compliance better than personal requests did. The lawyer's letter went out on a Friday, formal and intimidating with legal language about harassment and consequences. My ex's final message came that evening. I can't believe you'd lawyer up over this. Fine, you win. I'll leave you alone. I hope you're happy with your perfect new life and your perfect new girlfriend. I hope you never make a mistake and need forgiveness. Because clearly you're not capable of offering it to others. The bitterness in the message was palpable, and it revealed what had probably been there all along. She wasn't actually sorry about hurting me or genuinely interested in my happiness. She was angry that I'd moved on, wounded that I wasn't still available to soothe her ego, upset that her strategy of wearing me down hadn't worked. This was about winning and losing, not about love or genuine connection. And then, finally, silence. No more texts, no more calls, no more surprise appearances. I'd check over my shoulder at the gym for a few weeks, would scan the coffee shop before settling in with my laptop, still half expecting her to materialize despite the legal threat. But she didn't. The choice had ultimately been made for me by her own behavior. Her escalation had forced me to take steps that made the decision final and legally enforceable. But even if it hadn't gotten to that point, I realized I'd already made my choice at that coffee shop when I'd seen her across the table and felt nothing but distant compassion mixed with relief that I'd escaped. The person I'd been who loved her was gone. The person I was now loved someone else, someone who'd chosen me clearly from the beginning and continued choosing me every day. Rachel never asked for reassurance or made me feel guilty about the situation, but I gave it anyway because she deserved to know explicitly that she'd never been in competition with my past. You know that was never a real choice, right? I told her one night. Between you and her, between what we have and what I had with her, there's no comparison. You're not better than her. You're just right for me in ways she never was. And I'm sorry you had to deal with any of that drama. Rachel kissed me and said, "You handled it exactly right. You set boundaries, you were honest with everyone including yourself, and you didn't let guilt or nostalgia make your decisions for you. That's all anyone can ask." The contrast between how she handled the situation with security and trust versus how my ex would have handled it with jealousy and control just reinforced that I'd made the right choice at every turn. You made your choice, and it came from a place of self-respect you'd built over months of healing, a foundation so solid that no amount of manipulation or nostalgia could shake it. The choice wasn't made in anger or spite, wasn't about punishing my ex or proving that I was over her. It was simply the natural conclusion of becoming someone who understood his own worth and refused to compromise it for anyone, no matter how much history we shared or how sorry they claimed to be. A year ago, I would have agonized over this decision, would have second-guessed myself endlessly, would have felt guilty for not giving her another chance. But the person I'd become through all that pain and work didn't need to agonize because the answer was clear. Going backward would betray everything I'd learned about myself and what I deserved in a relationship. You told her the truth, that she'd hurt you deeply, that going back wasn't possible because you weren't the same person anymore and neither was she. And this final conversation happened not in person, but through a carefully written email after the lawyer's letter had established firm boundaries. I felt I owed her one last honest communication, not because she'd earned it, but because I needed to say it for myself, to close this chapter with clarity and integrity rather than letting legal threats be the final word between us. I want you to understand something, I wrote. When you left, it broke me in ways I didn't know a person could break. I lost myself for a while, questioned everything about my worth, my judgment, and my ability to trust my own perceptions. That pain was real and profound, and it changed me fundamentally. Oh, but here's the thing, the email continued. I'm not that person anymore. The guy you left a year ago who would have done anything to get you back, who saw you as essential to his happiness, who built his entire sense of self around being your partner, he doesn't exist anymore. And you're not the same person either. You've been through your own pain and growth. We're both different people now, and those two different people aren't compatible the way we once might have been. I wanted her to understand that this wasn't about holding a grudge or being unable to forgive. It was about recognizing that some things can't be put back together once they're broken. Not because of lack of effort, but because the pieces have fundamentally changed shape. That going back wasn't possible because you weren't the same person anymore, and neither was she. And this wasn't just a convenient excuse or a way to avoid admitting I might still have feelings. It was the objective truth that we'd both evolved in different directions, shaped by different experiences, and the people we'd become no longer fit together the way we once had. I'd learned to be more independent, to set better boundaries, to recognize red flags earlier, to value consistency over excitement. She'd learned whatever lessons her experience with Derek had taught her, had developed her own insights and patterns. But those parallel growth trajectories didn't converge back to where we'd started. They led to different destinations entirely. You explained that real love doesn't leave when things get complicated or when an ex reappears, and this was perhaps the most important truth I'd learned through the whole experience. What you called love when you left me for Derek wasn't actually love, I wrote. It was nostalgia or infatuation or unresolved attachment, but it wasn't love. Real love doesn't walk away because something else looks more exciting. Real love doesn't keep one foot out the door in case a better option appears. Real love chooses someone fully and keeps choosing them even when it's hard, even when temptation appears, even when the initial excitement fades into comfortable partnership. I'd learned this not from losing my ex, but from being with Rachel, from experiencing what it felt like when someone chose me clearly and consistently without wavering. Love isn't a feeling that comes and goes based on circumstances, the email continued. It's a commitment you make and honor through action, not just words. You said you loved me, but when your ex reappeared, that love apparently wasn't strong enough to withstand the test. That tells me it wasn't the kind of love that builds a lasting partnership. And now you say you love me again, but how do I know it won't evaporate the next time something shinier comes along? How do I know I'm not just the safest option now that your riskier choice didn't work out? These were rhetorical questions. I wasn't actually asking her to answer them because no answer would satisfy me at this point. I was explaining my reasoning, helping her understand that my decision was based on sound logic, not stubbornness or inability to forgive. You thanked her for the lessons the breakup taught you, for showing you what you wouldn't accept in the future, for inadvertently pushing you to become better. And I meant this genuinely without sarcasm or bitterness. In a strange way, I'm grateful for how things unfolded, I wrote. And I could almost hear her confusion reading those words. If you hadn't left, I would have stayed in a relationship that looked fine on the surface but was slowly eroding my sense of self. I would have continued compromising my needs and ignoring red flags because I was invested in making it work. Your leaving forced me to confront parts of myself I'd been avoiding. My tendency to seek validation externally, my pattern of accepting less than I deserved, my fear of being alone that made me cling to relationships that weren't serving me. The person I am now is someone I actually like and respect, the email continued. I'm stronger, more self-aware, more confident in my own worth. I have better boundaries and clearer standards for how I want to be treated. I've built a life that fulfills me independent of romantic partnership, which means I'm no longer looking for someone to complete me, but rather someone to complement an already complete life. None of that growth would have happened if you'd stayed and we'd continued on our comfortable but ultimately limiting path. So thank you for leaving. Thank you for showing me that I could survive something I thought would destroy me. Thank you for teaching me what I won't accept in future relationships. You gave me a painful but valuable gift, even though that wasn't your intention. For showing you what you wouldn't accept in the future, and the list was clear in my mind now after months of therapy and reflection. I wouldn't accept someone who kept their options open instead of committing fully. I wouldn't accept someone who made me feel like I had to earn their love through perfect behavior. I wouldn't accept someone who ran when things got difficult instead of working through problems together. I wouldn't accept someone who compared me unfavorably to exes or made me compete for their attention. I wouldn't accept someone who made me doubt my worth or question whether I was enough. These standards weren't about being demanding or unrealistic. They were about basic respect and healthy relationship dynamics that I'd been willing to compromise on before but never would again. For inadvertently pushing you to become better. Because transformation born from pain is still transformation, still growth that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I'd become physically healthier through the gym habit I'd developed to cope with heartbreak. I'd advanced professionally by throwing myself into work when personal life was empty. I deepened friendships I'd neglected during the relationship. I developed emotional intelligence through therapy that served me in every area of life. I had learned to be comfortable alone, to enjoy my own company, to build a full life that didn't require romantic partnership to feel meaningful. My ex had intended to hurt me by leaving, or at least hadn't cared about hurting me in pursuit of what she wanted. But the unintended consequence was that she'd forced me to level up in ways I might never have if we'd stayed together. Whether you chose to pursue things with a new person or stay single, you knew you'd never go back to being someone's backup plan. And this was the ultimate declaration of self-respect. I'm with someone now who chose me clearly from day one, I wrote. Oh, she didn't need to lose me and try other options before realizing what we had was valuable. She saw my worth from the beginning and has chosen me consistently every day since. That's what I deserve, and honestly, it's what everyone deserves, to be someone's first choice. Their clear and enthusiastic yes, not their fallback option when other things don't work out. On. Even if Rachel and I didn't work out long term, even if I ended up single again, I knew now what genuine mutual choice felt like, and I'd never settle for less again. You wished her well and walked away for good, and the final paragraph of my email was brief and genuinely kind despite everything. I hope you find happiness and healing. I hope you learn to value stability and consistency instead of chasing drama and intensity. I hope you work through whatever attachment issues led you to run from good things and pursue unavailable people. I hope your next relationship is healthy and fulfilling and teaches you what real partnership looks like. But that relationship won't be with me. We've both moved on. I just did it more successfully than you expected. Take care of yourself, and please respect my boundary of no further contact. I read the email 3 times before sending it, making sure every word reflected my truth without unnecessary cruelty. And then I hit send and immediately felt lighter, like I'd been carrying a weight I could finally put down. The irony wasn't lost on you. She'd left you hoping to find something better and ended up watching you actually find it. And this reversal of fortune would have felt like victory a year ago, but now just felt like the natural consequence of our different choices. She'd chosen to chase excitement and nostalgia, while I'd chosen to do the hard work of healing and growth. She'd gone backward to an old relationship that had already proven dysfunctional, while I'd moved forward into new territory. She'd measured success by intensity of feeling, while I'd learned to value consistency and compatibility. The outcomes matched our approaches. She ended up alone and regretful, while I ended up in a healthy relationship with someone who valued me. Not because the universe was punishing her or rewarding me, but simply because different choices lead to different destinations. You didn't move on to hurt her or prove a point, and this was crucial for me to acknowledge, both to her and to myself. My happiness isn't about you, I'd written in the email. It's not revenge for how you hurt me or a way to show you what you're missing. It's just me living my life, making choices that serve my well-being, building relationships with people who treat me well. The fact that it causes you pain to see me thriving is unfortunate, but not my responsibility. I didn't move on to hurt you. I moved on because staying stuck would have hurt me. This distinction mattered because it meant my healing was genuine rather than performative, was about internal growth rather than external validation. You moved on because you deserved better, and that was the greatest victory of all, not defeating my ex or proving anything to anyone else, but simply recognizing and acting on my own worth. For years, I'd believed that deserving better was contingent on being better, that I had to earn good treatment through perfect behavior and endless accommodation. The breakup had taught me that deserving was inherent, not earned. I deserved respect and consistency and genuine choice simply by virtue of being human, simply by showing up as my authentic self. I didn't have to be perfect to deserve good treatment. I didn't have to never make mistakes to deserve patience. I didn't have to be everything to everyone to deserve someone who saw my value. That realization was revolutionary and liberating in equal measure. And that was the greatest victory of all, greater than the promotion or the physical transformation or the new relationship, though all of those were wonderful. The greatest victory was internal, believing in my own worth enough to walk away from someone who didn't value it properly, having the self-respect to enforce boundaries even when it was uncomfortable, trusting my judgment enough to recognize that real love doesn't behave the way my ex had behaved. Victory looked like being able to hear from her without spiraling, to see her in person without being pulled back into old patterns, to receive her desperate messages without questioning my decision to move on. Victory looked like choosing my own peace over someone else's comfort, my own growth over someone else's desire for reconciliation. 6 months after that final email, I received one last message from my ex through a mutual friend who still spoke to both of us. The friend approached it carefully, asking if I was open to hearing something or if I'd rather not know. I told him I was curious, but that it wouldn't change anything, and he nodded, understanding. "She wanted me to tell you she's doing better," he said. "She's in serious therapy, actually working on her stuff. She's seeing someone new and apparently taking it slow, applying what she learned. She said to tell you she finally understands why you couldn't take her back, and she's sorry for how she handled it afterward. She's not asking for anything, just wanted you to know she's okay, and she hopes you are, too. I felt a surprising wave of relief hearing this, not because I still cared about her romantically, but because it meant she'd finally stopped chasing me and started doing her own work. It meant the legal boundaries I'd set had actually served their purpose, had forced her to look inward instead of outward for solutions to her pain. That's good, I told my friend. I genuinely hope it works out for her. Tell her I'm glad she's doing better, and yes, I'm doing well too. And I was. Rachel and I had just moved in together, a decision we'd made carefully and intentionally after a year of dating. Work was fulfilling, friendships were strong, and I felt more like myself than I could ever remember feeling. The person my ex had left barely resembled the person I'd become, and that transformation was something I'd carry forward regardless of where life took me next. The story didn't end with a dramatic confrontation or a perfectly poetic moment of closure. It ended with me simply living my life, making choices aligned with my values, surrounded by people who chose me as clearly as I chose them. It ended with my ex finally doing her own work instead of trying to shortcut healing by reclaiming what she'd lost. It ended with both of us moving forward separately, carrying lessons from what we'd shared, but no longer tethered to each other. And maybe that was the most honest ending possible. Not revenge or reconciliation, not dramatic declarations or tearful goodbyes, just two people who'd been important to each other once, choosing to let that be enough without needing to be anything more. Looking back a year after the breakup, standing in the apartment I now shared with Rachel, I could see the entire journey with clarity that had been impossible while I was in the middle of it. My ex leaving had felt like the end of my world, but it had actually been the beginning of understanding myself in ways I never had before. The pain had been real and necessary, the kind that burns away what doesn't serve you and leaves behind something stronger. I wouldn't choose to go through it again, wouldn't wish that kind of heartbreak on anyone, but I also wouldn't trade who I'd become through surviving it. She'd left hoping to find something better, and watching me succeed hadn't been the point. But it had been the natural outcome of someone who chose healing over bitterness, growth over stagnation, self-respect over desperate hope for reconciliation, and in the end, that was the real story. Not about winning or losing, not about who moved on better or faster, not about revenge or justice or karmic balance. It was about learning that you can't control other people's choices, but you can control your response to them. It was about discovering that surviving something you thought would destroy you reveals strengths you didn't know you had. It was about understanding that the right person won't require you to compromise your self-respect or accept being second choice. Most importantly, it was about learning that moving on isn't about forgetting or pretending. It didn't hurt. It's about integrating the pain into your story in a way that makes you wiser and stronger, rather than bitter and closed off. My ex had thought she was choosing something better when she left. What she'd actually done was free me to become someone better, to build something better, to understand better what I deserved. And for that, despite everything, I could actually be grateful.